Vous jurez que Monsieur le député Joseph est tellement indisposé.
Raise your right hand.
Vous jurez que Monsieur le député Joseph est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé.
Well, we'll mark the deputy as malade. We resume debate on P104. The principles have been adopted and scrutiny has indicated they do not wish to call the matter in. So how do you propose the articles, Minister, in second reading?
Sir, as advised in States Members' briefing that took place on 5th of March, due to the very interconnected nature of the provisions of the draft law and how they rewire certain parts of the Children's Jersey Law 2002 and the Marriage and Civil Status Jersey Law 2001, to achieve the desired policy intentions, I would like to propose the articles en bloc.
Very well. Are they seconded on?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on any of the articles in second reading? No one wishes to speak. Then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting the articles in second reading, kindly show. Those against? The articles are adopted in second reading. How do you propose in third reading?
Sir, propose the articles en bloc in the third reading.
Are they seconded for third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak in third reading? No member wishes to speak in third reading. Then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting in third reading, kindly.
Call for the appel, sir.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is the adoption of the Children and Civil Status Amendments Jersey Law in third reading. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law is adopted in third reading, 36 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. The next item is the Draft Children and Young People Jersey Commencement Act, P2, lodged by the Minister for Children and Education, but to be presented by the Minister for Children and Families. The main responder is the Chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Children and Young People Jersey Commencement Act 2000. The states make this act under Article 48 of the Children and Young People Jersey Law 2022.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I would like to propose the Draft Children, Young People Jersey Law Commencement Act. The independent Jersey Care Inquiry showed us all what happens to children and young people when the whole system fails. We learned that children had not been protected from harm and had not been listened to or believed when they gathered the courage to describe what had happened to them. Enacting this law is the next major step in the crucial mission to ensure that all children and young people in Jersey will grow up safely, to learn and achieve, live healthy lives and be listened to. Commencement of the new law will for the first time make a statutory requirement to ensure that everybody who works with children and young people contribute to the overriding objective to promote and support the well-being and safeguard the welfare of children and young people. The people and organisations included in the law are the Chief Minister, the Minister for Children and Education, which is now the Minister for Children and Families and Education and Lifelong Learning, Minister for Health and Social Services, Minister for Home Affairs, Minister for Housing and Communities, corporate parents, safeguarding partners and relevant providers, and providers of services for children and young people. Key parts in the law can be summarised as follows. Part 1 of the law identifies the overarching objective of the law and aligns them behind the UNCRC 4 general principles of child's best interest, unlawful discrimination, regard to children's views and their health and development. Together, they provide the vision for those working with young people in Jersey. Part 2 of the law sets out a requirement for responsible ministers and safeguarding partners to work together to promote well-being and safeguard the welfare of children. Recently published statutory guidance and safeguarding arrangements alongside new training resources all aim to strengthen joint working arrangements to support the changes in practice that are required in the new law. The investment and reform programmes in children's social care and education are examples of this Assembly's commitment to realise the policy intent behind the new law. The Minister for Children is required in Part 3 of the new law to publish a children's strategic plan every 4 years. Work has been ongoing to secure a revised plan with contributions from community, voluntary sector and young people themselves. Publication of this revised plan is scheduled for the end of this quarter. The provisions of Part 4 and 5 of the new law are intended to complement the existing child protection and care supervision provisions under the Children's Jersey Law 2002. Taken together, they provide a practice model for intervention along the continuing need which is based on the promotion and assessment of well-being that will derive the provision of support to all children regardless of the setting that the child is in. The new Children's and Families Hub will play a key role in leading and defining the early help provision going forward. This support is complemented by corporate parenting arrangements in Part 6 of the law, which define collective duties and responsibilities. The public authority corporate parents named in the schedule, along with the early years and educational settings, and a small number of arm's length or funded bodies, together provide a broad group of expertise and experience. They can make a real difference to a thriving childhood. Monitoring and review of corporate parent activities will be driven by the formation in the law by the Corporate Parenting Board. Part 7 of the new law introduces new statutory measures to support looked after children and care leavers through a published local offer of support. The aim here is to put provisions in place that support children in care to thrive and, as they grow older, move towards adulthood, avoiding a cliff edge of post-care that was experienced by many in the past. As I am reminded by the CEO of Jersey Cares, love never leaves. As a named responsible minister under the new law, I will play my part to listen and talk to children, to understand how we can do better, and to reach our goal of delivering world-class support to all of Jersey's children and young people. I will continue to explore how, in my role as Constable, I can lead the work to show there is a place for all children in Jersey. I am mindful of the previous ministers who have worked to progress this legislation, in particular Deputy Gardner and Deputy Dibley, and I thank them all. I can absolutely confirm that as the current Minister for Children and Families, I and the Council of Ministers remain committed to learning the lessons from the past and building better futures for all our children and young people in Jersey. I would also like to thank everyone, including officers, who have contributed to this significant piece of work, including again the law draftsmen who have had to undertake an enormous amount of work, whilst also working on parallel legislation. This will enable us to move forward with a shared aim and common language to have a direct positive impact on the lives of our children and young people. Thank you, sir.
Very much. And you propose the Act?
Yes, sir. I wasn't sure if it... Has it been seconded?
No, not yet.
Oh, sorry, yes, I propose... Sorry, yes, I propose the Act. Sorry, sir. I propose the act, sir. Thank you.
Is the Act seconded?
Yes.
Does any member wish to speak on the Act? Deputy Ward.
Yes, just very briefly, sir, because a lot has been said. So as a deputy in this Assembly and as Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning, the commencement of this Children and Young People's Act, I believe, is a positive step forward in the promotion and protection of children's well-being in the island. And I think we've learned, so I've got some words written down on very large print actually at the moment so I can see them. Post-COVID, sir, we're now aware more than ever, I think, of the importance of children's well-being. And there's a real key principle underpinning the new law, which is the commitment to support and improve the well-being of all children and young people in Jersey. And this applies to whatever level of need there might be. I think that's a very important point. And whatever setting those children are in. I know that in previous years, the educational outcomes of children in care have not been as good as their peers. And I'm pleased to see the consolidation in law of a requirement to establish a virtual school head, which could provide the oversight and coordination necessary to improve children's experiences of school and their learning. The new law also provides arrangements to avoid, as was mentioned, that cliff edge support that many care leavers have previously faced at 18, and it is such an important point. And that's important because that period of time in a child's life is the transition from school to the world of work or to further study. And as corporate parents, and I look to all of us now when I say that, as corporate parents, we need to ensure that those children and young people in care are afforded the best opportunities, whether it to be to advance their studies, whether it's via higher or further education, or taking advantage of local apprenticeships or wider training opportunities. Those opportunities need to be there. And the continuing progress and investment made through to improve inclusion in schools, and there's still work to be done there, through the Education Reform Programme is consistent with those aspirations. The emphasis on early intervention and what we do with early years, for example, and the focus on child's experience of features of work in schools and colleges. So I support the Minister of Children and Families proposition and the commencement of this new law, and I encourage members to do the same. And that's all I'll say on that one today. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the Act? No other member? Deputy Gardner.
Just very short. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Minister for Children and Families to bring in this Act to the Assembly and present this Act to the Assembly. For the last 2 years, Konata Private, as he was involved completely with children services, and I know that every word that was told here is coming from the heart, because the Minister does care to children, and especially children and care of the Minister. I also would like to say big thank you for the officers. It's one of the fewest acts or laws that come in front of the Assembly with full statutory guidance. So you know exactly what you received. And believe me, officers worked very hard, very thorough, gone through so many different consultations to make sure that all stakeholders will be content with the statutory guidance that come in with this together, and I'm grateful for them. I would like to Minister in his summing speech to address a couple points, as we know that the Corporate Parenting Board is extremely important to ensure that we are on the right way and right journey to deliver our promises to the children in care. Would the Minister advise if the Corporate Parenting Board has been reconstituted and met, and if all members of the Corporate Parenting Board have been trained? What does it mean to be a corporate parent? Because everyone, including me, needed to learn it. Second, I would ask Minister if he's planning to do training for all states members. What does it mean to be the corporate parent, and what duty does it bring to us? Another question, Children and Young People Plan 24-27 should be finalised, and if Minister has an idea when it will be published, so we know what our plan for children and young people for this year and 3 years going forward. And the last things it's work, and I know that the Conotap was, the minister was championing this. It's about updating care leavers offer, and if minister can indicate when we can see updated care leavers offer that hasn't been updated since the previous assembly. And again, I would like to congratulate, and I think it's extremely important, milestone that started at the previous assembly with the scrutiny and the government, and we work, it's one of these things that we work, I think, very collaborative together to get where we are now. Thank you.
Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. And I echo what Deputy Gardner said in terms of thanking people for their work. And in terms of the children's plan that will be coming, I think the current minister said that it would be published by the end of this quarter, which is very soon. And I wish the minister and the department all the best with that, because I know a huge amount has gone into that, and some excellent officers working on that. One in particular has worked very hard on that. And that will be a big moment for Jersey when the next children's plan is published, and a big moment for Jersey's children. And this Commencement Act today, we've just had the previous item, of course, was a very important piece of legislation. This is just as important, and it touches the lives of all children on the island. And there was a couple of things that I wanted to ask the minister to touch on in his summing up. In terms of the responsible people, in terms of corporate parenting, nursery schools are now falling under this law. And what I wanted to request from the minister is that he should ensure that those nurseries have the support that they need to fully comply with this law, which I know that they're all very, very keen to do. But some of our private nurseries are very small and do not have the same kind of administrative support that perhaps our school nurseries do. And I would want to see that they would be well supported in terms of supporting the well-being of the children in their care. Another factor that I see alongside the children's plan in terms of there's a line in the law about the duty to promote the health and development of children and young people. Another separate but related piece of work that Deputy Gardner and I had just signed off before the change of government was the new PSHE curriculum for secondary schools, which contained everything that the previous Youth Parliament had requested us to include in a new PSHE curriculum guidance. We had included that in there. So I would really like to see the current ministers continuing with that and bringing that forward with everything that the Youth Parliament had requested, because I believe that document, that PSHE document, will support the delivery of this legislation. And I hope all members will support this today.
Does any other member wish to speak upon the Act? No other member wishes to speak? I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. I thank all the members who've spoken for their comments. The Corporate Parenting Board has been reformed and will have its first meeting later this week. So I'm very pleased that we've managed to achieve that. I believe that everyone on there will have received training, but I think that's something we can take up at the first meeting just to double check, and if not, well, even if they have been, we can possibly reinforce that training. And I think the same of training for members. I mean, all members should have taken part in some training for their responsibilities as a corporate parent, but I think that does need some reinforcement. Recently, the constables asked Jersey Cares to give them a briefing on corporate parenting, and that was immensely useful in people understanding exactly what's required. The draft children's law, the draft children's plan, I've reviewed this a number of times, and I believe it will be ready for the end of this quarter. And it's important that we get that in place. Moving to nursery schools, I thank Deputy Dublé for raising this, because I think it is very important that The smaller nurseries are supported who might not necessarily have the resources to do that. And finally, PHSE rests with the Education Minister, but I am sure that he has every intention of bringing that forward as soon as possible. So I ask members to support this proposition. I maintain the principles and I call for the appel.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the Children and Young People Jersey Commencement Act. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the Act has been adopted, 42 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. The next item is cash payment and government sports facilities, P10, lodged by Deputy Stevenson, and the main responder will be the Minister for Infrastructure. Deputy, there's an amendment lodged by the Minister. Do you accept the amendment?
I accept Part A of the amendment, but not Part B.
Right. Well, in which case, I think we must read the proposition. Referee, can we read it as amended by Part A, if members agree? Do members agree that we can take the proposition as amended by Part A? Very well. Referee, would you read the proposition as amended by Part A?
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion: A, to request the Minister for Infrastructure to reintroduce the ability for members of the public to pay in cash at government-run sport facilities that have previously accepted cash payments by June 2024, and B, to request the Council of Ministers to review current and planned government policies regarding cash payments across all departments and facilities by June 2024 to ensure that islanders are not being unfairly disadvantaged or prevented from accessing services.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I don't like to have regrets, but following the vote of no confidence and the change of government earlier this year, it is a matter of regret for me personally that I didn't get plans to reform the cashless policy in place at our sports centres over the line before losing my role as Assistant Minister with responsibility for sport. I was working on it and will return to that point briefly later in my closing remarks if it is needed. The proposition before members today, I believe, is a simple one. I'm asking members to champion accessibility, freedom of choice and pragmatism. And I'm asking you to put those things and the experiences, interests and rights of islanders above cost-cutting exercises or what may be easiest for government's internal processes to handle. As we've just heard, I'm accepting Part A of the Infrastructure Minister's amendment, which limits the reintroduction of cash to those sports facilities which previously took cash. Knowing the sites, I feel comfortable that reintroducing cash at those facilities meets the aims of what I'm trying to achieve, as they are the general public access points and the places where you can turn up and pay to use the gym or the pool, for example, even if it's just for a one-off. But I would add that if the current business model changes, if public gyms are opened at sites like Langford and Oakfield, for example, or further sites are opened in due course, then I do believe that this should be reviewed. I'm not accepting Part B, which attempts to change the meaning of my proposition in such a way that it effectively makes it redundant. By including the word relevant, I understand that the Minister aims to limit any review of current and planned policies to just those affecting sports facilities. My intention is for government to take a look across all of its departments and public services to ensure that cashless policies or potential ones are not preventing vulnerable people from accessing public services. The wording of my amendment does not state that specific actions must be taken across government or that cash should be introduced as an option for all payment interaction with government at all levels. This isn't about someone turning up to pay their full tax bill in cash. And as I understand it, there are already government policies in place which place limits on accepting cash with the cashiers up to an amount of £1,000. I'm not seeking to change this. What it is about is considering if there are any other areas that potentially fall under the government's remit where islanders may legitimately need or want to use cash, and especially where cashless policies may be preventing someone from accessing an important public service. I don't believe that I'm asking much for government to review its policies in this way. And government should, I believe, want to do this and probably really be doing this already on a regular basis if it is, as it claims in the amendment, committed to making payment channels available which meet customer need while ensuring that islanders are not being unfairly disadvantaged or prevented from accessing services. As the report points out in the amendment, other areas of government have maintained the ability to pay with cash, and the Public Finances Manual continues to allow the taking of cash. So again, am I really asking that much for government to take a look, take stock of these policies and just reassure itself about what is in place? I want to look briefly at the wording of Part B. The report accompanying the Minister's amendment states, the amendment to Part B states that a review will take place across all sports and related facilities, which the Council of Ministers believes is the intention of the proposition. This will enable that part of the proposition to be accepted. I'm not quite sure how the Council of Ministers have arrived at the conclusion about the intention of the proposition. Certainly no one asked me, and my original wording for Part B clearly states that it's regarding current and planned government policies regarding cash payments across all departments and facilities by June 2024. So the intention of the proposition is quite clearly not to limit that review to sport and relevant related facilities. That's why it says all departments, and that's why I can't accept Part B. And I ask members to reject Part B of that amendment when we come to discuss it shortly. So it's true that public habits are changing when it comes to the use of cash, and it's fair to say that this has been accelerated by the pandemic. But we're not a cashless society, not yet anyway. And until such time as we reach that point, and solutions are in place to protect all in our community who may, for whatever reason, find the move to digital payments more difficult than others, then I believe the government has a responsibility to provide access to cash payments. I want to draw members' attention to an article from the Financial Times published only a few short weeks ago on the 28th of February, under the headline, Bank of England says cash still hugely relevant. The article states that the value of notes in circulation has risen by nearly 16%, with 1 in 5 people saying their preferred method of payment is still cash. It specifically cites the use of cash as a way for people to feel more in control of their spending and budgets, and it commits that the bank will protect access to a range of payment choices, including cash, for as long as people need it. And I want to repeat that last part, for as long as people need it. UK Finance comes to similar conclusions and says that although the use of cash had been declining, in 2022, cash payments increased for the first time in a decade, rising by 7%. These are UK figures, I accept that, but we can assume that some of the patterns of use are not too dissimilar in Jersey. As the report accompanying my proposition states, a case was recently brought to my attention of a vulnerable islander being prevented from using cash at Llanelwy Sports Centre because of the cashless policy. This was just one case, but it highlighted a policy that I'll admit I wasn't aware of at the time. I discussed it with a number of ministers at the time who agreed that they'd also like it to be looked into as well. So, sport is one of the world's great levellers, and it can bring people together in ways that nothing else can. It's good for our mental as well as physical health, and as the Value of Sport report published in November shows, Jersey's public leisure venues contribute more than 4.5 million total social value through improvements to physical and mental health and subjective well-being. Our public sports venues exist to protect and promote access to such facilities for a diverse range of islanders, because of exactly those kind of benefits. We expect that our public venues should provide services of a kind and at a price point which makes them accessible to parts of our community who may find the private sector more daunting, expensive, or difficult for whatever reason. We should therefore have payment options which also protect and promote accessibility and ensure that no one is put off or unable to access them because of a policy around how they pay. There are a number of reasons why cashless policies can be potentially problematic. Accessibility, for example, cashless policies are more likely to negatively impact the more vulnerable in our society. It can potentially alienate the elderly and impact on children who maybe aren't using bank cards or digital banking themselves yet. Members of the community with special needs have also been impacted, as was the situation with the case at Lekeneve. As I've said, our relationship with cash is changing, but we're not yet a cashless society. Cost of living, both the Bank of England and UK Finance, as I say, have cited the cost of living as part of the story around the ongoing use of cash. They say that often people feel cash makes it easier to monitor their spending when times are tough. Cash Access UK, a not-for-profit, highlighted in the same FT article I referenced earlier that in their experience, some of those increasingly using cash include digital savvy people in their 20s and 30s and workers on 0 hours contracts who need to budget. Financial exclusion is another area. It is a reality, some members of our society who are unable to open bank accounts. And that could be for all sorts of reasons, a poor credit rating or because a bank has turned them down for other reasons. And there may be occasions when some in our community may not want to leave the digital trails which card payments create. Domestic abuse could be an example of that, for example. And finally, resilience. Over the weekend, a technical glitch caused chaos at Sainsbury's supermarkets in the UK, disrupting deliveries and preventing contactless payments from being able to be made. Staff were stationed outside shops to tell customers they could only pay in cash. Such instances are rare, but they do happen. An increasing reliance on the internet is having very many positive impacts in our world, but it does have its potential downsides, and having access to simple cash alternatives, if needed, can be useful. The solution to this problem does not, as I hope my report makes clear, have to be overly complicated, bureaucratic, or costly. I believe a pragmatic, common sense approach can be found, which balances the need to accept cash for those who need to use it with the demand, which I accept is not likely to be significant. As a final point, I would just like to encourage members to consider the message that we send out today with this debate. I certainly don't believe that we should be trying to force any private businesses to take cash, but I do think that our approach can be useful for those considering their own direction in this area going forward. As I say, let's remember that we're not yet a cashless society, and government should not, I believe, be leading the charge on forcing that on islanders. Thank you, sir.
You move the proposition.
Sorry, sir. I got carried away. Yes, please.
Is the proposition seconded? There is an amendment which is to part B of the proposition, and I ask Greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph B, after the words across all, insert the word relevant.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. So I thank the Deputy for accepting part A of the amendment, and I should start by offering my apologies on behalf of the Department to the individual referred to by Deputy Stevenson, who is prevented from accessing Lekeneve. Part A reintroduces the ability to pay cash to those sports centres that formerly took cash. The amendment ensures that islanders will not be prevented from accessing services at Fort Regent, Springfield and Lekeneve sports centres because they do not have a digital means of payment. Accepting cash as a preferred method of payment at these centres changed at the start of the COVID pandemic some 4 years ago. Since then, I'm told some 800,000 people have transacted at Lekeneve alone, and we are aware of very limited concern or complaints across the estate. The public has therefore very much embraced new methods of electronic payment, which have become prevalent across society. Nonetheless, recognising the challenge faced by the very few islanders without access to digital means of payment, this amendment will ensure that in the event that a customer is only able to pay with cash at any of the sports facilities that previously accepted cash, they will be able to access the pay and play facilities. As the Deputy is aware, other sports facilities such as FB Fields, Grainville, Hope Valley 3G Pitch, the Pool, Langford and Oakfield sports centres do not have a reception, front desks or teams at the door to welcome users, and no payments are processed at these sites. These sites have not accepted cash payments, and this will continue to be the case. So, as stated by the Deputy in her report, we don't need to return to the previous arrangements at the same level, and whilst there will be additional cost, it won't be prohibitive at these sites. So, the amendment to Part B clarifies that the review of policies regarding cash payments applies to relevant departments. We are debating, sir, cashless pay at sports facilities. That's the heading on the proposal. It is not considered appropriate to undertake a review across all departments. The only facilities that went cashless during the COVID pandemic were the sports centres, and Part B of this amendment reintroduces cash as a payment options at these, Part A, of this amendment reintroduces cash payment at these facilities. My understanding is that other government departments and services did not change the payment options available. Policies, including the Public Finance Manual, allow for cash to be used as a payment option. Members of the public who are unable to pay for government services via digital channels can access CLS cashiers at Lamont Street to pay with cash. And as the Chief Minister confirmed this morning, there will continue to be the ability to pay for government services at the new office building. The amendment will ensure that cash payments options at all sports and related facilities are reviewed to ensure that islanders, especially those who are vulnerable, are not prevented from accessing services. So I wouldn't want to be restricted to opening Oakfield Gym only if we can accept cash for users. We have gyms around the island where you can pay cash, and I'm desperate to open Oakfield to the public just as soon as we possibly can. So the Deputy mentioned contingency plans, and that's a very good point, sir, and I apologise, I do not know what our contingency plans are within the operation, but I'm sure by tomorrow I will. So I ask members to support the amendment at B, that the review is of relevant departments. Thank you, sir.
Is the amendment seconded?
Sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I would also like to speak in support of the amendment. Government is not leading any charge in terms of accepting digital payments. Instead, it is responding to changes that we're seeing in society, both locally and internationally. The COVID pandemic, in particular, led to a step change in the take-up of digital payment methods, both here and internationally, globally. In 2023, the government collected 91% of its income through digital channels such as card payments, bank transfer and online payments. For many, but not all, digital payment channels are now the payment channel of choice. In 2014, in contrast, 40% of the government's income transactions were collected by non-digital channels such as cash and cheque. By 2023, only 9% of our income has come through non-digital channels. To extend cash payment options beyond the level that have existed to date would require cash collection processes to be established, and as Constable St John has just said, Minister for Infrastructure has just said, apology, third attempt, put staff at risk and increase the cost of collection. There are businesses, for example, I'm aware in CLS have recently, within the last couple of years, also tried to encourage people away from paying large sums of cash. Businesses, although there is the £1,000 limit because of anti-money laundering rules, there are businesses who will turn up and seek to pay Social Security contributions by up to £900 in cash. And what they are doing by that is pushing the cost of collection, bagging, counting and banking onto government rather than themselves. There is a cost to handling cash, and businesses who deal in cash, it's entirely reasonable, I think, for ask them to deal with that cash and pay government digitally rather than putting the burden onto government. Government does, however, accept cash and cheques from customers who wish to pay via these channels. In 2023, we received over 30,000 cash and cheque payments. The only area of government that moved to cashless payment during the COVID pandemic was sports facilities. We would not wish to reintroduce cash as a widely used payment option for all services or for all payees. Anti-money laundering legislation places requirements on the government when accepting large cash payments. It is important, and we accept, that all islanders, especially vulnerable, have the ability to access government services. Public Finance Manual allows cash as a payment option, and this amendment will ensure that any review of policies is focused on the relevant sports and related facilities. I think we also have to reflect, as Deputy Stevenson says, that there has been a little bit of an uptick in the use of cash. The share of cash payments amongst total payments declined from 15% in 2021 to 14% in 2022. A decade ago, that number was 54%, and pre-pandemic in 2019, cash accounted for just over 1 in 5 payments at 23%. And I accept that people do wish to use, some people may wish to use cash to help them deal with the cost of living. But we do also have to reflect that government's interaction with the public is generally not the same as the weekly shop or the weekly filling up of petrol. Apart from sports facilities, many people will not engage with government regularly. We pay our tax once a year for most, Social Security perhaps quarterly, or people it's deducted already through their payroll. Other services may be paid on an even rarer basis. But we do have processes where vulnerable people can buy pay cards, can pay for cash. People can buy pay cards for parking using cash in local shops. We can't halt progress. We do need to move forward. And my concern about the amendment with Deputy Stevenson's proposition, Part B of the proposition, without amendment, is that it asks government to do a piece of work. And we all know that that will not just be government going off and asking departments to think about it, because I'm quite sure in 6 months' time we'll be asked to evidence that the review has been conducted and written up and that the outcomes have all been properly considered and debated. I think yet again this is a proposition which indicates a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. Apart from the one instance at a sports centre, we have no evidence of the public having problems interacting with government or paying for government services in any way. There is also a demand for digital services in many places: payment of parking, payment of fines, payment of, for example, things like free school meals, and Treasury is supporting the Education Department in the implementation of an online portal, for example, for the collection of paid school meals. This will be at the request of parents who appreciate the simplicity of online payment, but I am quite sure the Education Department will be facilitating payment in cash for those people who need it. So I support the amendment to the proposition. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Jeune.
Thank you, sir. Just listening to this interaction, I just have some questions for the Minister for Infrastructure and the Treasury Minister, in that I'm feeling that I'm hearing that you haven't there is not necessarily the evidence collected that what is happening now in the services as we're going towards a cashless society, as the government's wanting to go towards this cashless-based payment schemes, that the evidence is there to make sure that this is actually fair and reasonable. And I think this section B that Deputy Stevenson has put is just asking for that kind of acknowledgement that it is actually fair and reasonable, because actually anecdotally we are hearing concerns. I know the Association of New Jersey Charities, a lot of the charities are raising the concerns that vulnerable people are finding it difficult to interact with the government when it comes to cashless payments. Also, older people as well are having concerns, and as more and more as we're hearing in the news recently, that scammers are becoming more prevalent in Jersey. That kind of interaction with the banks, the older generations especially are starting to become very wary of actually going into that cashless society. So this is, as Deputy Stevens had said, and I would like to stress that to the members, it's not asking to do a change, it's just asking to look at if this is if this actually is fair and reasonable for those vulnerable people in society. So not the 95% that the Treasury Minister has raised. Of course, many of us would say, yes, this is the right way to go, but there are many in society that do not have access. I know from my own charity that I'm chair of, we have to continue collecting cash on a weekly basis for our subsidised rent because our young homeless residents are unable to pay for us because they don't have access to bank accounts, and we're talking about young 18 to 25-year-olds here. So there are those in society who are unable to pay in a cashless way, and so this proposition, Part B, put by Deputy Stevenson, I think would be important for the government to actually evidence that this is the right direction or not. Thank you.
So the other member wishes to speak on the amendment. Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. The Minister for Infrastructure said the changes towards digital payments were made during the pandemic and people embraced the new methods. That's rightly said that they had no choice and it was imposed on them. However, there are still categories of people which find it very difficult to use digital channels, and therefore access to different services could be made difficult and doesn't show inclusiveness towards the vulnerable categories. It was mentioned that our limits already in place up to what can be paid in cash, and a very large amount in cash payments are not accepted anyway. Government is an issuer of notes and coins, and I would find it very inappropriate for the ones that need to pay for state services and goods to not be able to use what it is a legal tender. Therefore, I would ask members to reject Part B and support the original proposition.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I understand the Deputy advancing the concerns expressed to her by constituents who have found themselves unable to access sports facilities. I therefore intend to support paragraph A of her proposition. I did not hear the Deputy give any examples in her speech of constituents contacting her with concerns regarding any other government department. Nor am I, rightly or wrongly, personally aware of any of my own constituents struggling in this way. Deputies Shern and Kovac have referred to charities and others raising concerns in this respect. I believe and would be very interested, and it would be helpful to have clear and specific examples, and that it would be useful for government simply to be provided with these so that it can take action in respect of them. I share the concerns expressed by the Treasury Minister regarding the proposed use, if the amendment is rejected, of government officers' time and taxpayers' money across all departments to prove what could be just a negative in the absence of any states member being aware of constituents having difficulties in accessing government services outside the area of sport by reason of their refusal to accept cash. Could this not mean that already stretched government departments like the Revenue Department or the Planning Department, which have to make efforts to find out if taxpayers are struggling to pay their tax or to make planning applications because cash options are not available to them? So I suggest it would be preferable for the Deputy to return to the Assembly with more specific examples, and in the meantime for the Assembly to accept the government's amendment.
Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. And I'm very, very glad to follow that particular speaker, and we'll come to that point shortly. I'm really struggling with the government's position on Part B here. If the argument was that we don't need this review, that we're really confident, we know it's all working fine, and here's some really good examples of why we know that, then fine, I might be able to understand it more. That's not what we've got before us today. We actually don't have many reasons being put before us today about why the original Part B can't go ahead as it is. And the only thing I'm really hearing is that government just doesn't want to do this. And I do ask myself, why doesn't government want to do it? What's it worried about? And I keep coming back to, I personally, I think my view is it's just being overthought, to be quite honest. As I pointed out earlier, and I will say it again, my Part B does not say anything has to be done. It does not say change your policies. It asks government to take the initiative from here, have a look at what's going on, reassure yourselves, and then us as the Assembly and the community that everything is fine, and we are confident that we do have strong, robust, appropriate policies in place. Because I'll be really honest with members that my experience when I first asked these questions, when I was a member of government, was that there is a lack of clarity around cash policies within government. Departments don't necessarily agree. I'm not sure that even Treasury agrees. And actually doing this piece of work might force that conversation. I actually think it's a really important one. To come on to Deputy Scott's point, I also don't think it's the job of government or this Assembly to just firefight, to just find individual cases and then sort them out. I'm asking government here to have a look and ensure that we don't have more cases like that we have to sort out. And the review and discussions around it would also ensure that, as well as having clear policies in place, staff who are on the front line would be equipped to deal with the cases when they do come up. Whether that is a case of somebody wanting to pay a very small amount and finding it difficult, or whether it's somebody wanting to pay in a lot of cash that now goes above the £1,000 limit, and it's how you handle that person, perhaps an elderly, vulnerable person who may find discussions around money laundering and worries around that quite daunting, actually, particularly when there's a queue of people behind them as well. So it's about ensuring that staff are very clear on the government policies and they know how to deal with those individuals. The final thing I would just really add at this point is just, I suppose, an apology to the Minister that the heading on the proposition isn't exactly how perhaps it should be. It's my first proposition as a backbencher before this Assembly, and I think it would be a great shame if what the proposition is titled stops this issue actually being able to be dealt with here today. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Fuller.
Thank you, sir. I am supporting the government's amendment to Part B on the basis that, unamended, it would be asking government to be inefficient and to undertake a review that I think doesn't need to be done and could potentially be duplicating work that is already being done. As the Minister with responsibility for the disability strategy, as soon as I saw this particular proposition, the first thing that I did was contact the Minister for Infrastructure and say, I don't actually see the need for this proposition. Surely we can agree to reintroduce cash payments at these facilities. And I'm sure the Minister, you can see him nodding his head, won't mind me saying he completely agreed with me. This is a government that wants to be a government of action, not a government of endless reviews. And And the other thing that I did as the Minister with responsibility for the disability strategy was contact the disability inclusion team to chat with them about the work that they are doing to ensure that all government services are inclusive and accessible. Therefore, I know that there are structures in place for us to be liaising with the relevant stakeholders to ensure that where there may be issues with regards to access and inclusion, we are hearing from those stakeholders and we are able to act on those issues. That doesn't require a review across all departments. That requires clear and effective collaboration with stakeholders, including the Disability Strategy Advisory Group, which I now chair, and as I have said, is a priority for me. So that is why I am fully supportive of the amendment to Part B. It is important that we utilise government resources appropriately and we focus on action and not reviews.
Deputy Curtis.
Thank you, sir. With the dreaded phrase, I wasn't going to speak on this topic. The reason I speak is because I entered this undecided. We all obviously only found out how the vote was going to be split on the amendment. But after hearing Deputy Stevenson outline the simplicity of the original proposition, I'm minded to vote against the amendment by the Council of Ministers. The main reason for that being this can be as large and hefty and bureaucratic or as simple and directive as the Council choose to make it. I think when we think about cashless payments or cash payments, this is a wider part about how government interacts with its citizens. And I think the previous government and this one will have to take stock of the changes that have occurred over a number of years where citizens don't necessarily feel that channels work for them, that their relationship with offices are transactional. And I know from working with Modernisation Digital team and looking at our online platforms, what I think was said, and I'm sure will be continued to be worked on, is digital is part of a choice to make life easier for citizens. It provides a greater platform. But it doesn't and shouldn't replace the platforms of direct face-to-face phone contact and all the other mechanisms. And so I think a strategy or a policy around cash payments could fit on a single side of A4. And with ambitious delivery-focused ministers, I think they could do that within a Council of Ministers workshop. And I don't say that to be challenging. That's how I think real delivery with a clear mandate as to what they want to achieve can be done. We don't need necessarily even officers involved in this one. I'm sure their guidance would help steer some of the practicalities of running a float and securing money. but at the end of the day, this is about a simple stock take as to where does government see itself now and where does government want to go. And I don't see that has to take any more time than having the word relevant in. The relevant will still require government taking stock of those relevant departments. And I see no reason why this can't be hashed out, at least with the first draft, to come back to the Assembly in short order without wasting officers' time.
Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. Yes, it's been a very interesting debate. And of course, I think all of us here are wanting to support the move to digital payments and regarding that as a good thing. The issue here is really a much simpler one than that, which is to try and work out whether or not we have moved too far ahead of the public. Part B of the proposition simply asks to review whether we are getting it right. And as Deputy Curtis has eloquently said, that doesn't really have to be such a huge piece of work. But it is something that is important we think about. It is reasonable to ask whether we've got this right. It is possible that government has got ahead of the public on the question of payments. Deputy Scott raised whether there was the question of whether there was evidence. Well, I know Age Concern has raised this as an issue quite a lot. I could also speak about issues with members of my own family. So I think we may not be talking here about a large number of people, but we are talking about a small number of people who may be very significantly disadvantaged. That's the point here. And I do get that, the efficiency of government would be improved if we could just simply move everybody forward and try not to see too much of that potential problem. You know, percentages are all very well in terms of dealing with the take-up of digital payments, and, you know, we've maybe only got 5 or 10% of transactions now that aren't digital. Great. But the point about Deputy Stevens' proposition is it deals with those who for whatever reason cannot yet make that leap to digital payments. Can we be sure that we haven't cut these people loose? Part B asks us to check that we haven't prioritised efficiency over a small minority of people who will be significantly disadvantaged. I'm not sure it is government's job to try and lead on digital payments. I think rather that government should be a backstop for the most vulnerable in this position, and therefore that we should be taking the time and effort, not a huge amount of time and effort, but some time and effort, to work out whether we have not gone a bit too far, whether there are some areas where we couldn't make this a better experience for citizens. Equity matters, and I think, to be honest, the resources needed to do this have been somewhat exaggerated. So I would say let's support the original proposition, reject the amendment, and just be sure that we're getting this right.
Deputy Monroe.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to start with a question to the Solicitor General, if possible, please, sir.
Yes, what's
always like to liven up the debate with the question to the Solicitor General. I was just wondering, are there currently any laws, rules, regulations which require any establishment, whether government or otherwise, to accept cash or to take in cash, which is a general question?
I can answer that very shortly. The answer is no. Just to clarify, this is purely a policy consideration. It's not a legal one. Businesses, generally speaking, are free to, when they contract with a customer, to agree what method payment will take. It's a standard contractual approach.
Thank you, sir. And thank the Solicitor General for his answer, which was what I thought the case was in Jersey. I will be supporting the proposed amendment, but in the main for very different reasons to any that have been provided here. I will go into that in the main debate on the proposition, sir. But I do agree that a review isn't necessary. And quite simply, I think actually a better proposition rather than one before us would be one to make it effectively a law that cash has to be accepted by places, because I do believe we're talking about human rights here, and I will get ready for part 2, sir. Hold your breath, because I'll bring that up in the debate on the main proposition. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No, Deputy Gardner.
Apologies. It's very quick prompt by Deputy Morel. I'm trying to understand the logic, because the Part A accepting cash in 3 sports facilities. The Part B asking to just think, not to do huge review. If other departments stop accepting cash, and they might accept cash less than £1,000. So if it's human rights approach, it means that that people can be able to pay cash. It means that the Part B need to be rejected, and the government need to think about it, where people can pay cash and not. It's simple. I'm grateful for Deputy Jean to raising the young islanders that don't have cards to pay and to arrange cash payments, because we always speak about most vulnerable without cards, more elderly people. And I think it's really going probably across the board that there are people in each age category that would struggle with only online payments.
Connie Harbison-Lawrence.
Thank you, sir. It might help members to know that, as far as I'm aware, every parish hall accepts cash when people go in to pay whatever it is that they're paying for. So we certainly don't believe that we have to insist on card or cheque payments at all. And I do wonder if the government is going to lead in a cashless society, whether that means that the Treasury will be producing less cash in the future for us to actually use. And I'd be interested to ask a question on that in due course. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Mezek?
Thank you, sir. It's just very briefly to make the point, sir, that this is absolutely not a debate between one side that's pro forcing everybody to stop using cash or one that wants to maintain that option. It sounds like everybody wants to maintain that option and have that fair service across everywhere where it's necessary to make sure that nobody's disadvantaged. If Deputy Stevenson had proposed her proposition with the wording in the amendment rather than as it was originally written, I don't think anyone would have batted an eyelid and would have thought that that paragraph is absolutely fair and allows the government to get on efficiently as it ought to make sure that we proceed and ensure that cash options are available everywhere where it's appropriate and relevant so people can benefit from them. Deputy Renouf said in his that he'd found this an interesting debate. I found it extremely boring debate on that basis because we're arguing over wording that frankly is not that important and nobody would be batting an eyelid if it had been proposed this way in the first place.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? And I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir, and thank members for their indulgence, and apologies to Deputy Mezek if we're boring him. So the Treasury Minister explained that the government is not leading any charge to change. I'm not sure if that was a play on words, but she also spoke about the cost of handling cash from businesses. What was important, which we shouldn't lose sight of, is that we received over 30,000 cash payments in 2023. That's approximately 600 cash payments made by citizens of Jersey, business of Jersey, each and every week. We also heard that pay cards are available in local shops for those who want to pay cash. Deputy Jean said there was no evidence collected and no evidence fair and reasonable. Well, so in my opening, I spoke about the 800,000 users at Lekeneve and the fact that we've received one complaint. One complaint too many, I will accept, but one complaint. Deputy Jean also mentioned the Association of Jersey Charities, and I'm sure the Deputy has, like me, noticed that we've gone in St John's Church from a small paid device to a stand-up click-and-go machine, so there's no way of getting out of church without giving them some form of remuneration. So customers, and you can also use cash when you leave the church. I see the Dean nodding, sir. So people can still pay cash each and every day at CLS in Lamont Street. And people were prevented during COVID for the last 4 years from paying cash at 3 sports centres. And I absolutely agree with Deputy Stevenson. We had to change that. Some of the examples given by Deputy Scott, sir, you can actually pay for those services using cash at CLS, I believe. Deputy Stevenson also said that the government don't want to do this, and she spoke about her time in government and the lack of clarity. The Deputy will also be aware of different opinions within the sports department, sir, about accepting cash. I made it very clear, we're going to do it, sir. We are going to find a solution, we found a solution, and we're going to get it sorted. I would give her that reassurance. Deputy Feltham spoke about the conversation we had, and we couldn't believe we were having the conversation because it was so straightforward that we should do this, and do it we will. And the Deputy also spoke about her discussions with stakeholders. Deputy Curtis spoke about the amendment from the Council of Ministers. I'm sorry to disappoint him, but actually it's in the name of the Minister for Infrastructure, so I have to shoulder the responsibility. And he spoke about a strategy on an A4 sheet of paper. So I could give it to him now. We accept cash for services at CLS in Lamont Street each and every day, sir. As I said earlier, around 600 cash payments per week. And Deputy Renouf asked if we got ahead of the game. Well, sir, when I became constable in St John, there was no card payments whatsoever. Within 2 weeks there were. So we stopped people having the chore of driving to the local supermarket to withdraw cash and then come back and give us cash. So I can tell you 100% of our dog licences in St John's were paid using card payments. But the ability, as the Councillor St Lawrence said, to pay cash still remains. Deputy Morrell, I look forward to his contribution to the main debate about human rights. And I think there is a debate to be had where the Councillor St Lawrence spoke about whether or not we produce more cash or less cash, because we've heard in the past the value of cash, the Jersey pound and how it circulates. I think that's the debate we should be having today, not whether or not we continue to accept cash or we don't accept cash. So I'd remind members it was only sports centres who stopped accepting cash. Soon we're going to be moving to a new headquarters that will, like Lamont Street, accept cash. And I'll ask members to support Amendment B and call for the appel. Thank you, sir.
As called for, I invite members to return to their seat. The vote is on Part B of the amendment. I'll ask the referee to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of voting, and I ask the referee to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted. 30 votes pour, 12 votes contre, no abstentions.
Can we have your names, please?
Those members voting contre, Deputies Ayer, Gardner, Wall, Renouf, Jern, Kovac, Alex Curtis, Wilson, Stevenson, Andrews, and Dublé, and the Conatable St Clement.
Very well, we now resume debate on the main proposition as amended. Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. I'll be brief because I think members are in support of this, but I just wanted to further highlight the need for children to access cash, be able to make cash payments, because of course they cannot open their own bank accounts until they're 16. And in the report, Deputy Stevenson highlighted the vulnerable members of our community who, as adults, may not have access to bank accounts as a result of economic abuse. This happens to men and women, and it's not just by partners, it can be by other family members and even friends. And a recent survey in the UK showed that actually 2/3 of the population had been subjected to some kind of financial or economic abuse. So that's just another reason to support this proposition, and so I will be supporting it.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Morrell.
Thank you, sir. Now for the exciting part two. And it's really not that exciting, but sir, my thoughts on this are I'm really pleased that that this is settled in many ways. The amendment's been accepted, and I'm sure the Assembly will pass the proposition as a whole. But I just wanted to flag and actually thank Deputy Stevenson for bringing the proposition, because certainly in my kind of 6 years in the Assembly, this is the first time we've spoken about cash. And it was comments prompted by a colleague of mine in the last few days, where it suggested that actually that there should be a plan to move to cashless society. My retort was very fast. It was like, absolutely not, sir. Because cash is a lot more than just transacting in money. And in fact, the Treasury Minister's speech just now kind of reinforced that for me. Because what I heard was, cash is just not efficient and it's inconvenient for certain receiving parties, therefore we need to get rid of it. The trouble is that efficiency and that inconvenience is, on the other hand, in my view, a fundamental right, and it's the right to privacy, sir. And I'm looking here at the European Central Bank, and they have an interesting little page on cash. And amongst many benefits of cash, Not only they point out that the vast majority of transactions in the Eurozone are made in cash, still 73% of them. There are some really important aspects of cash which I truly believe we must not lose. But because of the efficiency, I do it, of just popping the shop and tapping the card and walking out again. And because it's quicker and easier for Treasury to count it when the ones and zeros pop in automatically down the phone line. And banks love it as well because it makes their life so much easier. Those are not reasons to lose your fundamental right to privacy as a human being. Quite simply, I see a paper cup in front of Deputy Sutherland. Sir, if I wish to buy that paper cup off Deputy Sutherland and he wishes to sell it to me, I believe we have a fundamental right to transact that payment and that purchase without anybody else knowing about it. How much I paid, the fact that it's happened or taken place, I don't believe anyone need know about that, sir. And indeed, the European Central Bank says cash ensures your freedom and autonomy. Banknotes and coins are the only form of money that people can keep without involving a third party. I think that's really, really important. They also go on to say that cash ensures your privacy. Cash transactions respect our fundamental right to have privacy, data and identity protected in financial matters. And so, sir, I really just wanted to use this opportunity presented by Deputy Stevenson to say that actually cash and us as an assembly discussing cash is something that's really, really important. Because the forces of efficiency, which stretch from the banks to government, are incredibly strong. And they will drive us towards purely electronic payments. But the moment that happens, it means that you cannot ever, as a human being in this society, transact privately again. And I just think that's fundamentally wrong. There is no need for a third-party payment provider or the government to know every transaction that I make. I have a right to buy a car off someone and pay them in cash if that's right. And so be it. We have, as has been mentioned, we have anti-money laundering laws, which obviously limit the amount of cash you're allowed to spend in private transactions, and that's fine. That provides a limitation, but it's not a limitation that should become absolute, so that we have no cash whatsoever at all. So, sir, I certainly will be supporting this proposition as amended. And I do hope, and I will be thinking about it myself, whether actually we need a proposition to enshrine the kind of right to cash transactions in Jersey. Because what I have heard from the Treasury Minister is that there is a slippery slope, that basically the desire by Treasury and others to not have to put up with cash, to be cheaper, to be quicker, to be more efficient, will rob us as a result of a fundamental human right, and that is the right to privacy and also freedom and autonomy. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Stevenson to respond.
Thank you, sir, and I'm very grateful to all members who've contributed today. As I said in my opening, I think there are points that can be taken beyond this actual proposition, and I think Deputy Morrell has just given us some examples of that and some food for thought perhaps for those in this assembly, but also those outside as well, and I'm sure it won't be the last we hear of that. I won't dwell for too long, if only for the fact that I don't want to bore Deputy Mezek any longer. But I actually, on that point, sir, I would say though that I'm a newly backbench member bringing my first proposition to this assembly, and to have an experienced member such as himself, saying that, I don't think it's particularly encouraging. But anyway, I shan't dwell on that anyway. I'm very, very grateful. There we go. I'm very grateful to everyone who's contributed today. As I said, I think this is about finding a right-sized solution to the problem. I'm very encouraged by what the Infrastructure Minister has said around that, and appreciate the points that he has made. I think the figures around the fact that we still have 600 cash interactions with government every week is something that just reinforces the point about why we're having this discussion today. And then the principle around our public sports facilities being as accessible as possible. I would just add one more point, perhaps for the Minister's benefit more than anybody's, but funding for the sports facilities budget is always under pressure and is actually currently worked out on what I believe is very much an outdated model based on a fully functioning Fort Regent bringing in certain amounts of revenue, for example, and I would just not like to see the sports facilities budget put under huge amounts more pressure because of this, and I think the Minister recognises that and has assured the Assembly that he doesn't plan to make it a very expensive solution. So thank the Assembly, and I ask members to support the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Those in favour of adopting the proposition kindly show.
Call for the appel.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on cash payment at government sports facilities as amended. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 41 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. The next item is update of higher education student funding, P12, lodged by Deputy Gardner. The main respondent will be the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning. Deputy, there's an amendment lodged by the Minister. Do you accept that?
So I considered a long time if to accept the whole amendment, and unfortunately I cannot accept whole amendments. Saying this, I'm sure that members will be happy to say that I think that it would help to focus the debate if I accept some of the parts. So I'm having part accepting part F, J, H, I, and J. So the part of the proposition.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? What you're accepting? You're accepting what?
Parts F, J. G. F, G, H, I, J.
G, H, I, and J. Greffier, are you able to read it with it?
So all parts that were actually for 2025, and I believe that regardless the amendment, we still have time. So I'm happy to make the debate easier and more focused on other parts.
In which case, do members agree that the proposition could be taken as amended by paragraph 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11 in the amendments dealing with paragraphs F, G, H, I and J? Very well. I ask the greffier to read the proposition as amended in that way.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning to A, agree to fund all distance learning courses to the same level as in-person courses following the same funding application process and criteria. B, classify a student who has been and continues to be living financially independently of their parents or guardians for at least 1 year before the first academic year of the student's course as an independent student. C, include related subjects as eligible for a clinical component grant. D, implement guidance to ensure that the clinical course allowance for related subjects captures, but is not limited to, the following areas. 1, paramedic science. 2, pharmacy. 3, occupational therapy. 4, podiatry, and 5, physiotherapy, chiropractic, osteopathy. E, bring forward the necessary legislative changes to the Education Grants and Allowances Jersey Order 2018 to implement the preceding paragraphs, if adopted, with such changes to take effect from the start of the academic year in September 2024. F, update thresholds for means-tested funding in line with inflation and relative earnings in a sustainable and affordable way, subject to the necessary funding being allocated. G, research and consider introducing a sliding scale for the amount of tuition fees that may be awarded. H, bring forward the necessary legislative changes to the Education Grants and Allowances Jersey Order 2018 to implement paragraphs F and G, if adopted, subject to the necessary funding being allocated, with such changes to take effect from the start of the academic year in September 2025. I, review the threshold for relevant assets detailed within Article 12A of the Education Grants and Allowances Jersey Order 2018 and to report back to the Assembly on the findings and recommendations of such review no later than December 2025. And J, work with the Minister for Treasury and Resources to assess the long-term financial viability of any student loan scheme for island students and undertake a consultation if appropriate.
Deputy Governor.
Thank you, sir. This proposition is brought in the hope of addressing some of the outdated thresholds, definitions and policies that I apply to provision of higher education student financing through the amendment to the Education Grants and Loans Jersey Order 2018. I would like to share with members a background how this proposition was brought together and why it is needed at this time. After the elections in 2022, I was made aware that little, if almost nothing, has changed in student finance since 2018. So I faced 4 years of stagnation, of any changes, regardless the inflation and cost of living in student finance. I was challenged rightly immediately by the student loan group representative and also scrutiny panel. And I arranged on the 7th of September 2022 meeting with all stakeholders at Highlands Education Department. I have listened to all views and voices, and we discussed priorities because the wish list was very, very, very long, and we honestly discussed the priorities, what can be done within 4 years. I wish the current education minister has been there together with the scrutiny members. Our agreed first priority was to update maintenance grant to meet cost of living increases. After 4 years, the increase that was proposed by the previous government, 2.9, was inadequate, when we were only too well aware that during the 12 months from September 22 to from September 21 to September 22, the RPI for Jersey increased by 10.4% only. I examined all student allocation and spending within the SAPS department budget. And even though I was told it's impossible to make any payments after grants were already granted and funds were transferred to the student's account, I have worked well with the Treasury and I managed to pay to eligible students extra 7.2 of payment within a month since that meeting. And we managed to allocate total uplift in 2023 of 10.1%, everything from existing SAPS budget. I didn't go back to the Council of Ministers and ask for more money. It's right to look how you use the funds that are within the department. At that meeting, we also discussed, created and described in some detail the roadmap for the way forward. And because it always was impossible to do all amendments in one. During the last academic year, actually for this academic year, for 23-24, within 6 months being in the job, I have introduced 7 substantial changes, like maintenance that have sliding scales that people didn't use, introduction of 10% uplift to the maintenance grant provided to the students studying in London, increase of bursary for care leavers to enroll in higher education from 3,000 to 3,429, increase of amount of clinical component for grant awarded to students studying medicine, dentistry, nursing, and veterinary scheme. And also remove the academic requirement to become eligible for a grant and replace with the requirement to have received an offer of the place from a higher education provider. This particular change was very interesting. I didn't plan this change, but this change came on the back of the appeal when I realized that we are disadvantaged young people who didn't get good grades at school, gone to work, got the experience, worked in education, and they were ready to progress to the higher education. And the only thing they were missing is the A-level. So we changed that. If the university accepts the person, we can support the young person going forward. And it's been done. Why I'm mentioning all this? Because this was the first step, and the amendments that I didn't accept, and I'll speak about amendment a bit later, it was the second step for the academic year starts for 2024. And this is why I feel a bit passionate about it. I was repeatedly asked by scrutiny during public hearings about updating the threshold and different changes. In 22nd October 2022, Deputy Catherine Curtis, during the public hearing, asked, I just have a question about this, which I found really concerning. The Jersey Student Loan Support Group has recently published results of their survey. I think it was actually all parents who responded to the survey indicated that they were having to take an extra work, borrow money, make significant financial decisions like remortgaging or taking money from their pension in order to support their adult child to study. Do you think, Minister, it was me, that is adequate, assuming some people may not be able to do this anyway, and the ones who can are being impoverished in the way by putting their children through the university? And my response is that it is very concerning, that I know that maintenance grant is not enough, and I'm doing steps for the academic year, and I promise to review the thresholds going forward. I can see the Conor Tapp of Greville smiling. 27th of June, Conor Tapp of Greville asked a similar question, and I asked that I have phase 3, as we discussed between scrutiny and the department, was forwarded to the scrutiny. And the phase 3 that was forwarded to the scrutiny in June 2023 is included, basically. This is the base for this amendment. On 26th of September, Deputy Power asked me about the appeal process. And we talked about the process as this, and I very clearly stated that I wasn't satisfied with the current education finance order. For example, there are places where I had discretion, like to disregard second income. I had the discretion to be flexible about length of the residential time. But I wasn't flexible for the independent student who lived independently more than 2 years to sign off the grant and make sure that this young person who lived independently, financed himself independently for more than 2 years, because he's not meeting 3 years, will need to wait for another year in his progression. And I didn't feel it's right and it's fair, but I couldn't do anything because I didn't have discretion in the law. I committed to bringing these changes and is working according to the planned roadmap. I know that if the minister does not sign these decisions for these particular 3 changes, that I didn't accept the amendment by 31st of March, it will be impossible to implement from September 2024. And this is it's so important that we would consider this seriously, because these 3 amendments that actual real people, real young people who need to wait for another year to receive this extra support. It's small amendments, and I'll speak about the amendment later, but this is why I brought the proposition now, because I knew the deadline from my previous experience. This is the deadline. It cannot, because you need to go through the processes, to put processes in place and make sure that it's adopted. I feel strongly that this should not be about our political struggles and changes. It should be about young people who would be losing another academic year, and not about the personalities and the games. So back to the proposition, and I would like to very quickly go in some details and extend later. Distance learning. And I would like members to look into the supporting information page 2, that it's very clear in the table stating what's the difference. I think I just tried to make it easier. It's extract from the law. As a minister, I received appeal for a student with autism, who we ultimately granted a special payment because I didn't have discretion. We don't have anything else in the law. So I need to ask to the chief officer to go around the public finance manual and to do the special payment, as I considered not supporting him to be equivalent to discrimination against the student for whom in-person course would not be suitable, because for this particular young person, in-person course on the campus is not suitable. There are numerous reasons why other online courses may be chosen: carrying responsibility for elderly parents, children, or other members of the family on the island,
special requirement, and acute anxiety, such students are at a financial disadvantage purely because the course is suitable for them in delivering online. They can study online and they can work online and be economically active members of our society living on the island and continue to contribute. B. Now to the independent finance, and I just mentioned the student may fled from abusive home, maybe fell out with the parents. There are many reasons why young people leave the parental home. Having to refer to the parents' income just because the parents' income, and I don't think it's right. C and D, I really go on it quick and I'll extend. C and D, I would like members to to look at the information part 3, the pages that I put on the table, information part 3. It will be easier for me to explain. I think it was an anomaly, and it was something that was missed in law drafting. If you are looking at paragraph 14, and it's extract from the order, you can see that clinical year means academic year for form of the courses in medicine, dentistry, veterinary science, or related subject, and includes a period of study of clinical trend. So the related subject mentioned in paragraph 14.1, the related subject mentioned in paragraph 14C. What's happened, I don't know if you turn page around, in the paragraph 15, 1A, they only mention medicine, dentistry, nursing, or veterinary science, and somehow the related subjects were excluded, forgotten. So from paragraph 14, it didn't progress to paragraph 15. I believe it's happened some error. And basically, what does it mean? That the students who are studying paramedic, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, that need to travel for their placement, they need to travel for their areas to be able to train, they don't receive this clinical component. What they also don't receive, they don't receive NHS grant of £5,000 because they are not UK resident. What they also don't receive, they don't receive any loans and submission for the hardship bursary because they're not UK residents. So, and this has put our students in a disadvantage and in an extra financial struggle. These are 3 changes that I planned to introduce in 2024. A second part of the amendment that I have accepted, it's a reason that we need to review the threshold, and I hope that the thresholds will be renewed because we all understand that during 6 years, the real term pays are not the same. We know that the £100,000 earnings in 2018, it's not the 100,000 earnings in 2024. And it means we have now less young people eligible for the grants, because even though that earnings grow, that the real terms, and you can see the graph, is gone less. Now, sliding scale, and this is going to the supporting information part 1 on my pages. What does it mean? If you look, if people earning less than 110,000, they will receive 9,250. But if they will earn 110,000 and £1, so £1 more above the threshold, they will lose almost £1,000. If they have 2 children, they will lose almost £2,000. There is a formula. As I told that it was a plan going forward because I couldn't do everything at once. This anomaly, like very hard threshold, I've changed for the maintenance grant, and it doesn't exist anymore in formula developed. I believe the same should be done to the tuition fees grant. Because even though that it sounds a lot, if you have family with 2 children and mortgages and somebody took extra work, and this is actually how I came about to change it for the maintenance, because I've been approached by a member of the public with a young person and saying, I took extra couple hours to support afternoon club. I owned a bit more and now I'm losing more than £1,000. So this is why it's important that it will be adjusted. Part 3, relevant assets. I think it's the 500 property. So is it 500,000 property in 2018 would cost today 700,000? Maybe. So the older brother who went to the university in 2018 received grant because he was eligible, for example. And the younger brother, because now this property will cost more than the same property, no change in family circumstances, it's just different tax price, they will not receive any funding. Is it fair? Obviously not. We had several conversations during the scrutiny enabling families to afford to send their children to uni. If parents' wages are £50,000 and less, and even that student gets full grant, it's just above 18,000. The academic year, it costs between 23 to 25,000. Some of the families don't have ability to find and to bridge this gap. And this is why I'm raising, and I'm asking Minister, and I'm happy really with amended proposition, with amended way, that the part of options for loans will be reviewed. I believe that it's not to completely to go from grants to loans, but to allow options to be able to borrow the money. And we know that education, from my perspective, and I've always been very passionate about education, for me education is the only way to independently escaping poverty. As somebody who was born in mining town in Kazakhstan, I know this personally too well. Without education, I don't think that I would be here today. We must enable our children to have access to all available options to use education to improve their life and prospects. One option is to access extra funds to student loans. I'm not a big fan of student loans. It's a last resort, but I feel they are necessary in some circumstances to bridge the gap. And it is good. So I'm bringing forward this proposition because I believe this is the minimum that we can continue and do within the next 2 years of this Assembly. And I brought it before the Assembly, as Deputy Ward said himself on numerous occasions, important the Assembly will debate things. So I will move the proposition and go into the great statistical and financial details during the amendment debate.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
There is an amendment, or a number of amendments to the proposition. I ask the greffier to read the amendments.
Page 2. After the words lifelong learning, insert the words following consultation with the Chief Minister and Council of Ministers as appropriate. Page 2, paragraph A. For the words fund all, substitute the words explore new additional funding options for, and delete the words to the same level as in-person courses following the same funding application process and criteria. Page 2, paragraph B. For the words, classify a student who has been and continues to be living financially independently of their parents or guardians for at least 1 year before the first academic year of the student's course as, substitute the words, review the classification criteria for, and after the words, an independent student, insert the words, taking into account the criteria elsewhere in the British Isles and consider the implementation of changes that would deliver enhanced targeted support. Page 2, paragraph C. For the word include, substitute the words consider the inclusion of, and after the words clinical component grant, insert the words if appropriate. Page 2, paragraph D. For the words implement guidance to ensure that, substitute the words work with the Minister for Health and Social Services to review the scope for. For the words captures but is not limited to, substitute the words including consideration of, and after the words following areas, insert the words if appropriate. Page 2, paragraph E. After the words to implement, insert the words any outcomes of. After the words if adopted, insert the words subject to the necessary funding being allocated, and after the word September for 2024, substitute 2025.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. First of all, sir, I thank the Deputy for bringing the proposition. It's enabling you at a very early stage to look at some very specific issues around higher education funding and consider the longer-term strategic approach to this area that's needed and perhaps has been lacking.
Just one moment. So, do we have at least 2 members online? Otherwise, we're in quorate.
Oh, that's always hurtful.
Yes, sir.
Yes, very well. Please do continue. We are quorate.
Thank you, sir. It's always hurtful when it goes in court when you start speaking, if I'm honest with you. Anyway, so I'll talk to each part of the proposition I propose. I thank the Deputy for accepting from parts F onwards. I will mention a couple of things about those, though. The updated thresholds that were suggested in the report was a 20% rise up to 144,000, where all fees will be paid. And there's an issue around that, 2 issues really. One is the affordability of it, and the second thing is whether we want to give that level of full funding for families earning that amount. And that's a wider debate. And we need to look really carefully at thresholds because it is an expensive scheme and a more generous scheme than most places that we have. Now, I support that, and I'll say now, sir, I don't support student loans because I think they put our students in debt long term, and we need to look at more creative ways in which to enable funding. I was one of those parents who did remortgage in order for my 2 children to go to university. I knew they were going to go to university because they didn't really have much of a choice with 2 teachers as parents, and we really wanted them to because of the value of education, but we looked ahead at that, and I know a lot of parents do that. So let's go do this in turn. I can't do it out of turn, it doesn't work for me that way. So part A, distance learning has become a more common method of studying in higher education. Particularly since COVID, there's been a boom since COVID, but we're not entirely sure that boom will continue. As we start to get back to in-face contact, we're not sure that that will be a pattern that continues, so there's an uncertainty there. What we need is a more comprehensive understanding of the potential benefits and unintended outcomes of basically opening up all distance learning to full funding. And that's what the original amendment says, and so I have to refer to the original proposition, in order to get that juxtaposition between the amendment and the proposition. So I hope that's okay. So the estimate is between 200 to 400,000 pounds per annum of the proposition for 2024. And I will say there was no funding in the government plan for this last year that has just come through. So this is funding that needs to be found from somewhere in the education budget. The annually managed expenditure, the AME, which is where the funding for the student finance comes from now, is like Social Security, and we do a little lesson on annually managed expenditure, which I've had myself. Social Security is funded this way. Simply, if there are more people who need to claim Social Security, there is a fund of money more people can claim. If a big company goes bust, for example, let's hope that doesn't happen. It is the same for grant funding. If we have a lot more students going to university, there is more money available to fund those students. But that money is not there for changes to the scheme. Any change to the scheme and the criteria itself needs a bid to be put in for that extra money. And that has not happened previously. And that would have to happen now, using last term's government plan, and it was not put into that government plan. So this is a very difficult one to actually attain. So there is no funding stream in the government plan for that change at the moment. Also, sir, I think we need to be very careful about opening up distance learning without some really careful consideration of what that will mean. We have to look at whether the distance learning courses we're looking at are the ones that are right for Jersey. The effect they will have on locally provided distance learning courses and the sort of blended courses that are offered by our higher education establishments online. And the last thing that I want to do with a remit of lifelong learning is to put anything in the way of our institutions on this island that are given a variety of options for higher education. I think that would be an unintended consequence that will come back to bite us later on. And just to give some comparisons, and they are in the report, and I must thank the officers who worked on this in really quite short order. We had about 5 days to turn this round for 9 different amendments, all of which had a significant impact on the scheme and could have had significant negative impacts long term. In Guernsey, there's no explicit provision for maintenance grant for distance learning. In England, maintenance loans, and that's a really important distinction, are only available to unable to attend a course in person because of a disability. And there's no maintenance grant available for students in the Isle of Man for distance learning. So it does show that we do have a relatively generous approach to it here. Into the future, then yes, it would be great to look at that and try and extend that and target that in the most appropriate way for our students on island. Certainly, and I will say as well that the few cases, and it was interesting that the cases we didn't have discretion for could still be dealt with. And yes, I know the officers don't like to make special payments, they hate making them, but it still solved the problem for the one case that had to be dealt with. So it is possible to deal with these situations. Sorry, sir. As an islander, sir, we want to widen access through people's lifetimes to education. And that's a very important point throughout their lifetimes. So my amendment does agree to explore new additional funding options for distance courses. But it does so without opening the floodgates to any online courses, many of which may lack the regulation of standards we would want for our students. And so the original proposition that funds all of these without consideration of the appropriateness for the students and the provision or the long-term cost impact for the grant scheme. So I simply cannot agree with that approach. So I urge members to accept that amendment to Part A, which is a more considered and a more targeted approach and something that we need to do longer term. Part B needs to be amended as well, and my amendment, so a blanket change could have unintended consequences. To say you only need to be away from their home for 1 year certainly could have unintended consequences. Students leave home in 18 in order to live independently for 1 year and then qualify for a higher level of grant funding which ignores parental income. I'm unclear, sir, and I can't see any reason why not, whether that may include a year abroad, working abroad for a year, funded by parents, go abroad, you're now independent and you get the full grant. I don't think that's the best use of state's money for those who may not have qualified for a grant long term. And it's also a very nuanced need. In the past 2 years, there's only one exceptional case that's come before the Minister for this scenario. Therefore, the amendment will mean that this is the amendment, and I want to read it out, sir. It will review the classification criteria for independent students, taking into account criteria elsewhere in the British Isles, and consider the implementation of changes that would deliver enhanced targeted support. And remember that the care leavers offer exists already. So for those care leavers that we talked about earlier in the children's law, there is provision already made for those young people to have that independence. There is also the ability, sir, to write off the disregard of parental income if we want to, due to a particular circumstance. And that has happened, sir. Well, it was on the... I can't find the actual data. I think it was on one circumstance that was needed in the last year. And so this, again, this is about targeted support where we needed. And the implications for these changes for the fund overall. I think we need to be very careful before we make this blanket change effectively very quickly in this assembly without knowing the long-term impact of it. And so therefore, I urge members to support the amendment to Part B. So Part C and D include related subjects such as eligible clinical component and specific areas being captured, but not limited to the areas detailed. It's necessary to amend this part of the proposition. And let's talk about the UK bursaries offered by the NHS. There's one context that's very important for those students in the NHS. they're taking out loans to pay for their degrees. They're ending up with 60 or 70,000 pounds worth of debt before they even start. And actually, sir, for most of the cases, the loans, the money that they're given by NHS trusts mean there is a need for them to work for that NHS trust for 2 years, and then that money is taken off the amount that they can loan for their subsistence. So actually there's not extra money going to those students, they've just got less of a loan. Our students, and when you compare the two, and I know our grant system is not perfect, of course it's not, but if we want to fund all of that, we need to look at our taxation system, the way we're going to pay for it, and that's a different argument. But our grant system, for those who qualify below, will pay over £27,000 of fees for those students going to train. That's worth a lot more than one bursary, and it means that they have not got loans and debts when they finish. Yes, for some families it's difficult to find extra, but those significant amounts of payment that are made, I don't think it's fair to compare those NHS bursaries in that way, because they simply do not do what is being suggested here. It is like comparing apples and pears. We could propose something similar in Jersey, but we need careful consideration. Therefore, the amendment is to work with the Minister for Health and Social Services to review the scope of clinical courses allowance for related subjects, and including consideration of the areas given. And I know that the Minister for Health is very open to those discussions, because we both want to target the money that we have for education and health in the right way and the need for this island. If it means that we have a shortage of some areas, then yes, let's look to the health service. But that also makes a very clean distinction between the education budget for the main degrees and courses and the extra needed for particular health areas. Otherwise, we'll get down the line of funding all sorts of little proportions of qualifications, and it makes the entire system messy and disjointed. And that's where we are at the moment. We need a joined up view of the way that we're going to fund higher education, and that's going to take some work. And that brings us to the larger argument of how much we will fund in the end. So my amendment, to Part D, allows a more considered and targeted approach of what is needed for Jersey. It also enables the Health Department to address those specific areas for the service. And I know that is something that the Health Minister is open to. And in fact, when we discussed it around Council of Ministers, I was expecting a bit of a pushback, but I got a nod from the Minister saying, yes, it's exactly what we need to do. And I'm pleased to say that that's the sort of thing we can do cooperatively moving forward. So in terms of the dates for ENF, it's very difficult to do anything other than say that we can only go for September 2025. Simply so, there was no money in the government plan for this. There was no money put aside for this. If this was something that needs to be done, it needs to be included there. Otherwise, this is going to have to come from the grant system itself, which means that some people in that system won't have, perhaps we won't have the money that we need in order to fund that, and actually it can't come from that because it needs to be addressed. We can't take it from the AME funding, so therefore it's going to have to come from somewhere else in the education budget. Sorry, so I was going to read something that I have written down. I'll leave that until the end if it's necessary. And so then the question is, where else does it come from in the education budget? Does it come from the school meals? Does it come from our inclusion work? Does it come from the work that we're doing with teaching assistants, who I was questioned about earlier as to where the money's coming from? I know some people in this assembly think that we're not doing anything for schools on purpose, which is simply untrue. But does it come from the budget to repair the schools that so desperately need replacing? Where does it come from? We need a coordinated, joined-up approach to education funding, and to make piecemeal changes like this just throws a spanner in the works of a system that we need to change. And I repeat what I said earlier, sir. I know that this grant system is not perfect. It cannot fund everything. But I believe the cost is around £16 million a year. We fund a great proportion, particularly towards the bottom end of the income scale, will receive the highest amount of money. And just to talk about the sliding scale thing, sir, that we will look into, there is an issue with the sliding scale that it does tend to benefit those at the top of the scale more than those at the bottom. So we'll be directing money towards those earning the most rather than where it's needed most. So it's a really difficult thing to say, But I will say, as Minister, when there is a limited budget in the grant system, and I go back to it, would I like, politically, sir, would I like to fund every individual on their own to go to university so I had the freedom to do that? I'd love to do that. But that would take a political change in this assembly, which I don't think I would have agreed, because that would take a change to our tax system. I think it's an investment in our future that would be wonderful. But what we have at the moment is a system that does fund a significant number of our young people and families as best it possibly can. There's a constant pressure just to spend more in different areas in a piecemeal way. And that has come repeatedly for years and years and years. So we have a decision to make today as to whether we accept those piecemeal changes or whether we accept the amendments that I've brought to this proposition so that we can have a more measured, more considered and more fruitful approach to making the changes that we need. And we can come back to this assembly when they're fully funded, when we know how much they're going to cost and we know the full implications of those changes. So I urge members, sir, to support all parts of this amendment, and I make the amendment, sir.
The amendment seconded? Yes. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I can't help feel there's some irony in the amendment that has been brought by the minister, the new minister. It does seem slightly odd, although I'm sure the deputy will be able to explain why I'm mistaken in my view. We just heard him reference piecemeal changes, can't fund everything. It's a bit of a transformation, I feel. And in particular, I couldn't help but wonder what would the backbench version of Deputy Ward have made of Deputy Gardner's proposition. Let us imagine for a moment that Deputy Gardner had brought this proposition when she was still minister last year. How, I wonder, would Deputy Ward have reacted at that time? I'm trying to imagine Deputy Ward telling his colleagues in Reform Jersey, look, the minister is going too fast here, we need more time to consider the matter. What this proposition needs is an amendment to slow things down a bit. Yes, it's possible there could be students who will lose out this year if my amendment passes, but it is a complex issue, and I think the minister should have another look. Is that what Deputy Ward would have thought then? Would he really have brought this amendment as a backbencher? I can't help feeling that he wouldn't, but I'm sure, as I say, that he can set me straight. It seems to me there's another irony here. The effect of this amendment is to remove the element of instruction, of change. It turns it into a request to consider, which is mentioned 3 times in parts B, C and D. If I could note at this point a comment made by Deputy Feltham in the previous debate, because it was quite arresting. This is a government of action, not a government of endless reviews, she said. So what have we got here? In place of action, instead of a change in policy, the amendment proposes more time to think about a change of policy. But that's not all. There are further barriers to action because change will only be considered after consultation, which is mentioned in the first part of the amendment, consultation with the Council of Ministers, I note, not necessarily with students, and of course a review referenced in what would be parts B and D of the proposition if the amendments were accepted, and all if appropriate, which is also mentioned several times. A government of action, not a government of endless reviews, said Deputy Feltham. I guess if your definition of action is consultation, reviews and consideration, then it's full speed ahead. But that wasn't the sense I took from Deputy Feltham. The truth is, it seems to me, from listening to the opening speech from Deputy Gardner and from Deputy Ward, that the original proposition here is not a big deal. The money involved is not a massive amount. The figures are a few £100,000. On the question of funding streams, I'll defer to Deputy Gardner to talk about where the money might come from. I do note that in the report, the Minister has said it could be up to 2 million, but the higher figure seems to be based on the notion that there may be abuse of the system. And I find this, I don't think this is plausible, given that there will be this much abuse of the system when the department already has a baseline from previous years of the number of people and the system can be tightly monitored. And I do think also that there were some red herrings in terms of the possibility that this proposition would undermine local provision and some of the other unintended consequences that he mentioned. It seems to me that this is straightforwardly about increasing student choice, and that in general, as I think the Minister accepted, that we would like to do that. The point is that the background work has already been done. The previous Minister explored all those questions that were raised. Her report to the proposition seems to me to be tightly argued, with the criteria for these new measures being carefully drawn. In response, the Minister's report offers comparisons with other jurisdictions which do not offer the kind of support that Deputy Gardner is proposing. Well, since when have we been happy to not do something that is right, just because other jurisdictions have failed to take a lead? Jersey is a small jurisdiction that could take a lead in some of these areas. We could, in a small but significant way, expand access to different types of further education, particularly, for example, distance learning, where there is a demand. So we can have a review, some consultation, even an exploration, all after due consideration. Or we can just get on with it and make it work, because this is a government of action. As I say, there is some irony in hearing Deputy Ward arguing for a convoluted set of actions that delay action rather than just getting on with it. So I urge members to reject this amendment so we can debate the main proposition on its merits. Thank you.
Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I stand and rise and consider what might have been. In 2018, Reform Jersey Port Manifesto pledged that we would change our tax system to increase revenue generated by government. We estimated at that time it would have been around £9 million to implement, £9 million gain if we implemented our policy. And that was all going to be dedicated to higher education and further education funding. So this debate may not have happened at all if in that term after 2018 to 2022 that had been successful. Unfortunately, as myself at that election, I was not successful, and neither was that policy brought forward. So here we are looking at changes to fund our higher education without generating any real extra revenues to fund it all. And especially as this element was not put into the government plan with the proposition so detailed, I can imagine that this was something very much that the deputy who brought the original proposition was thinking very hardly about, and so must have struggled to find that funding, and this is why we're having to debate it. I have some issues with the original and why then that I can support the amendments. When we talk about distance learning, as Deputy Ward mentioned in his opening remarks, that the online learning has seen quite a boom. And in fact, there was one particular university, only online university, that was pushing out a lot of courses for people. And I know someone who applied for one of these courses. Now, I'm not sure what some members are aware of when it comes to transitioning with degree courses, that if you go from a BSc style degree to try to achieve a master's degree, it's very easy to go from a BSc to achieve an MA or an MSc, because you've studied a science component which can get you ready and calibrate you to the learning that is required to achieve an MSc. However, if you've achieved a BA, that transition from one component to another is actually very, very different. Somebody I know invested a lot of their own money to pay for a course to try and achieve themselves an MSc, moving from a BA. Unfortunately, this individual struggled and had to drop out of the course because he wasn't able to cope. That's because the vetting process for the university was so lax that they accepted absolutely anybody to take on these distant courses. So if they were, could they want the money? That's how they operate. They are businesses that need money, some of these online courses. So I think the point about exploring the additional funding options for distant learning in Part A is very important. And also the review into the classification criteria for these, for the independent learning as well, and independent funding, as Deputy Ward mentioned, is also incredibly important, because, like you said, there are ways, if somebody goes off to do a year working abroad, they would be financially independent, but they come home and live with their parents again. And if those parents are incredibly wealthy, then they can really afford to help them out if needs be. The one area, though, that I was really struggling with. And I would have actually, if this whole debate was taken on block, I might have actually rejected the whole thing, where actually there are good components that I support of all areas. But it's this area around the related subject eligible for a clinical component in section C, and then the fields listed in item D. I have very consideration. Now, it's a shame that on point 5 that physiotherapy is included with chiropractic and osteopathy, because the three fields are all very, very different, and I don't think should have been contained together. And actually, if the last two that I mentioned weren't included, then I wouldn't have had an issue at all, just because the clinical relevance of these subjects is not necessarily proven or would necessarily contribute much to our health service. And so any scope for them to have to be involved in funding it, I don't think would work. But having said that, with the amendment of it, it allows to include the consideration, if appropriate. Actually, then, okay, that's good, because, yes, very much we need to include our paramedics, pharmacists, occupational therapists. But there was also, I felt there was areas that were missing, that, like clinical psychologists. We need those over here. We need people to be studying for those kinds of qualifications. So we see a lot of the time when we have large amendments brought to thought through and detailed propositions from backbenchers brought purely as wrecking motions. But these amendments, I don't believe, attempt to wreck this proposition. I think they show the prudence that is required, that if funding was available at a drop of a hat, that it would be very easy to achieve. But like I say, I do worry, and when we talk about the distance learning, about these online universities that will just take your money and not worry about your qualifications. So I'm not quite sure how this is going to be taken, but I would recommend that members do support the amendments, especially in option A, part A, C and D. And there is also a lot of truth in the what Deputy Gardner said in her opening remarks on the proposition as a whole, that the grant scheme does need to be looked at, because she's right. With RPI, £110,000 today is not worth the same as what £110,000 was worth 4 or 5 years ago. And because these haven't moved, there does need to be reconsidered. But we also have to consider that we also removed some tax relief, some tax incentives that used to come. And so that's made it harder for families. So there are possibly other options that would make families easier to afford to help support their children going off to university. I do concern myself with loans, because that puts an air of debt over somebody's head. We see schemes that have operated in the UK where they struggle to reclaim those loans. And so these are all things that we do need to consider, and just rushing out and doing things inappropriately will cost us more in the long run. So I do recommend that members do accept the amendments. I think they are thought through, they are constructive, whilst also airing a certain level of caution. Thank you.
Any other member wishes to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak?
Sorry, sir.
Deputy Gardner.
Okay, thank you, sir. I have every sympathy for the Minister, Deputy Ward. He is in a very difficult position, it's a new position. The Education Minister has one of the largest budgets, and residents of all ages engage with the department every day. It is a difficult, complex job connecting to so many areas. And I completely recognize that it does take time to familiarize with the student finance complex issues. And this is maybe why he didn't meet with me to understand the background, to discuss his possible amendment to my proposition. I waited for the amendment. And when I received the deputy amendment an hour before everyone's seen it, you can imagine that my stomach, 1 hour, I've been sent. But if it's 4 hours, again, it was amended, it was discussed, and my stomach turned. I felt sick. I realized that actually, I didn't want to use this word that we've heard for 2 years in the States, that just Deputy Coles used about the wrecking amendment, but after coming back to my senses, I said, okay, what can I accept? And I accepted half of it, which I think less critical because it's for 2025. And I do recognize for amendments that Deputy brought forward from F, G, H. We need special business case and it needs to go through the Council of Ministers, and this is why I accepted the amendment, because I know for a fact there is more job needs to be done. When I looked through the amendment, I could see every action was converted into explore, review, if appropriate, consider. And the best thing that I really, really loved is to consult the health minister if paramedics, physiotherapists, and pharmacists are medical-related professions. Are they? I mean, do we need to consult about it, or actually the education minister can make a call if the paramedics, pharmacists, and physiotherapists are medical-related professions? The minister suggested that it might need to be funded maybe from the health, but we are funding clinical components for the doctors and for the nurses and for the dentistry from the grants. So why we would send paramedics back to health? And I'm not sure, but I think it's just one of those things. The opening sentence to the report, and this is where I do recognize Deputy Ward that I do know the Minister. As the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning, I was, committed to ensuring all islanders have an equal opportunity to realize their potential through access to higher education. And straight after that, I need a year to consider. I have met with the Minister after amendment was launched and tried to find a way that the young people who planned and could progress to the university this year will not be affected by the timeline proposed by the Minister. And there are 3 areas that I feel strongly that morally I cannot accept, as I know that we could introduce these changes from September 2024 if requires a will, a bit of more work to correct processes and States Assembly decisions. There is several times been told about the budget. For most of the proposition from F down, we need to do budget, special budget we don't have. We moved to the annually managed expenditure this year, and I was pleased that I managed to move it to the annually managed expenditure, because from now on, the Education Minister doesn't need to ask for upgrade. It will be uplift because it started to be automatically. It's moved to a different system. I asked the Minister what is the allocation, how this expenditure works. The expenditure has a budget envelope that's sitting with the Treasury, and within this budget envelope, we don't know if we have 1,500 or 1,550 students, so the budget envelope is bigger, and it's like with income support. We don't know if we have 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000 people who would come to income support because whatever happens. The budget envelope for this year for higher education grants is 16 million. At least this is what I've been told on the 12th of January by the member of the Treasury Department. If something changed since then, it means that we have some difficult issues. So when I brought this proposition with the funds that were allocated for the parts A, B, C, D, it was based on 16 million allocation to the higher education grant in annual managed expenditure when we spent just above 15 million. We have about 15 million, it might be a bit more, but we do have extra within this small envelope, and this is what I built on when I put the proposition and when I plan to do the changes. And if the Minister would refer to the written question that we received, we would see what was the expenditure for this year. Also, Minister needs to find the expenditure only for one term, because it starts from September. So it's actually a third of the amount of funds that was raising. I would like to address piecemeal approach. It's not piecemeal approach. It was the project. It was the plan that was put together in 2022, and we've done changes after changes. So this is 3 small changes were planned for this year. As I promised to the scrutiny, and Minister, welcome to speak with the scrutiny member what was planned to the 2024 starting academic year. Officers didn't work for 5 days. Officers actually worked on this from 2023. I had submissions from the officers to me in December, something accepted, something did accept it. So officers did policy development in these areas. These areas were not completely new for the officers. We had different options and different discussions, and I picked one that's something that I would pick up. And I'm grateful for the minister, by the way. It's not about the officers of the minister, because minister did need to put lots of things together and learn about lots of things. Now, when we dealt with the money, I would like to go into 3 parts in a bit more detail. Distance learning. Current distance learning policy is based on historical way of open university students are able to study in the evenings while working in the day. Indeed, distance learning was historically considered as a part-time studies. However, since the pandemic changes in our way, and everyone mentioned the pandemic, moved forward. And there is no reason why a distance learner in Jersey can't get a degree from Australian, American, Canadian university, and easily from the UK, and also from Jersey. I have myself and Deputy Ward actually attending university courses in Canada and participated in distance learning since the beginning of being elected. The increased number of students that for various reasons choose the option of distance learning. For some students, it's not the choice. There are courses now, and I had another appeal, actually I didn't put it in the proposition, that was specific course was option only study online. There are some qualification courses that now are not available in person. For very specific areas, it's very limited, but they're still there. Why should students be disadvantaged purely because the course they chosen or their circumstances means that their courses needs to be delivered online? On average, learning undergraduate course is cheaper. An average approximately 6,000-7,000 compared to 9,250. So if we are talking about the balance, it can be. Financially supporting my increase, numbers of students actually staying on the island and continue to work on the island. Because when they're going off the island, they're not necessarily coming back. But when they're studying online on the island and participating online, they're staying here. Where we're making now, online courses felt like they are not good enough, they are not qualified enough. Online courses are now available from Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford has a top 1,400 courses for 2024. And one of the reasons that Minister amended his worry about the regulation, and according to his office's views, according to the report, it's less well-regulated online environment. Very interesting that in the report, Deputy Ward didn't mention didn't put a link, that actually England recognizes distance learning and they're giving loans of 9,250, exactly the same amount of loan for distance learning compared to in-person learning. Now, if England can recognize and probably has a system to manage online courses, why we can't? I'm really worried that while Deputy Ward explored the world of blended learning, students will be left behind patiently waiting for a report that might never come. Actually, distance learning, it can be environmentally friendly, but let's leave it. It's less flights involved. Distance learning is even more important to all the students who have families and commitments on the island and for their lifelong learning. There are people who working in blue-collar job wishing they could study to get the qualification to enable a career change. I want them to be able to afford to go part-time work and be a distance learning full-time in Jersey. If they're prepared to do work to upskill themselves and to get qualification would otherwise import, I believe we should support them. I mentioned an appeal from a parent of a young person with autism, for whom, thanks to the chief officer, we arranged special payment, and I have received an email from this parent before this debate, said that the young person is well on the way to getting a first-class degree in biology, which would have not been possible without this funding barrier being removed. I really believe this is the way forward to help our community get the necessary qualification to remain on island and further support to the local workforce. This amendment doesn't remove the barrier, it's keeping it for another year or longer. Such students are financially disadvantaged purely because the course is suitable for them delivered online, and some people might say this is a persistent, systematic discrimination against some of our most vulnerable students. It's for the members to decide, is it too early, is it too late? Deputy estimated between 200 to 400. I would say without trial, we don't know. When the minister, when he was a deputy, introduced free bus pass, we said we'll have a trial, we know how much does it cost, so maybe we'll have introduced the distance learning and we'll see how much it will cost, even though that we do have in the allocated budget in AME some space to allow this happen. Now, Part B, Deputy Ward, so the Minister in his amendment proposed the use of discretionary powers. I do consider discretionary powers to be useful in unusual and exceptional circumstances, to occur unexpected. What's interesting, and this is members need to understand, the minister, I need to remember, in the report, quote Article 4, that the minister has discretional powers. If somebody would look at Article 4, it's only related to dependent students. Article 4 doesn't allow any discretion for the independent student. Again, what we can do, and probably for that person that I couldn't sign discretion, not to tell you, the person needs to submit appeal saying that the parents are abusive, and when we have two parents abusive, I'd be able to sign discretion. But do we really need to go that way? If the young person decided to live independently, for whatever reason, I don't believe that the young person needs to dismiss the minister in the appeal, saying that their parents are unsupportive. For whatever reason, he decided or she decided to live alone. And this is why we need clear rules. And also, by the way, rich parents can be unsupportive too. And some jurisdictions have a strange clause of a year. I dislike this terminology, but support the logic behind it. This is support for people who have worked and live independently for a year. It's not about gap year, it's not about being homeless, and it's not about coming back to parents' home. It was mentioned he will go for, or she will go for travel, young person, and come back and live at parents' home. Every year, when students apply and reapply to next year, the student would need to prove that lives and independently and has financial independence. Every year before the grant awarded, the checks are in place. And I don't believe that somebody would misuse it, but I do believe that people and young people progress with their life. And because I'm not 3 years, I just need 3 years to do something without actually educate myself and get on the career path. And as I explained about the component, it's 66,000. This is the whole subsidy that would require. Does this assembly don't think we have 66,000 to support paramedics, physiotherapists, and other related professions? And I would like to read you from a letter from mother that sent to me. I will take the names out, I got the permission. Jersey Clinical Field extra funding does not cover paramedics, but it does cover veterinary students. How fair it is. The UK give allowance up to £86 per night if a student has to travel to a placement. However, as a Jersey student, will receive only 18.11. interestingly enough, before this debate, I just received the email that this information was incorrect on the website. And after they arranged, because the student needed to travel to Plymouth and they needed to stay overnight, finishing work at 2 p.m., they managed to arrange some sort of accommodation and thinking that £18 will be paid back. When they started to claim this £18 now from the student finance, they said, oh, it's actually not for the placements, it's for the field. So basically, the placement not included either. So this £1,000 really can make a difference. My husband and I have also changed jobs over the last year and we receive less wages than previous year, so we cannot really, and now we don't have funds to support. The student, the person has been in St. John's Ambulance since age 6 and has many times given time to help others. Student has every intention to coming back to work in Jersey once her studies finish, and we feel that the current system is very unfair with the amount of funds we are expecting to provide. Now, I have accepted 5 parts of the amendment, but I started to be really concerned following the Minister comments, because he said he doesn't believe in loans. So amending the last part of the proposition, which is assess the long-term financial availability of any student loans for island students. If we don't believe in loans, why are we committing to assess? But again, it might happen. It's an interesting situation, and this is where students caught up. They don't have access to student loans in the UK. We actually don't have enough funds, and I agree, to provide perfect support. So we are not ready to open any options to top up. We are not ready to give more grant awards. And basically what we are doing, we're having less and less students that become eligible to be able to access higher education. So, to us, I do suggest the distance learning is between 200 to 400. I would assume it will be around 300. Independent, even big uncertainty, I would say 180. And 66 for clinical component. And I believe these 3 changes can be done this year, and it will be done this year. This is why only these 3 areas that I wasn't ready to accept the amendment. I recognize that the minister has very difficult work to do, and he will need to get business cases and to review all other parts of the amendments. I know that our funding system, this is where we agree, cannot be perfect. It will need to be updated from time to time. It is investment. Let's invest in the future now. 3 small changes for very limited amount of people, and not invest just in the future. So I'm really asking members to reject the first 3 parts of the amendment.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm sorry that 2 former ministers have suggested this amendment brought by the new Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning should be regarded as a wrecking amendment. I don't believe the minister to be any less passionate than the former minister in his desire to deliver good and fair education to islanders and to serve Jersey's public in doing so. He has expressed a willingness to consider the deputy's proposals rather than just allow them to be steamrolled through. The risk of not spending public money judiciously is a matter I would have expected to resonate with the deputy in view of her role as chair of the Public Accounts Committee. Deputy Renner suggested that the minister take another look at the wording of Deputy Gardner's proposition, while lambasting him for his restrained approach. I respect the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning for bringing these well-reasoned amendments. Maybe things change when the minister becomes a backbencher. The thoughts and sentiments expressed by Deputy Mazek in the last debate come to mind. If Deputy Gardner had brought forward her proposition with the amendments now being proposed by the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning, would anyone in the chamber have had a problem with that? Education is expensive. It needs to be fairly and reasonably distributed while affordable and selective. The current wording of this proposition is too wide to support this principle. Had the Deputy been moving for this proposition while continuing in her former role as Minister for Education, I believe her own officers would have advised her no differently, while pointing out the need for funding in the government plan. I consider it a pity that the Deputy proceeded with this proposition rather than agree the position for the Minister to bring the proposition himself. It therefore has not received the level of scrutiny for a rather complex proposition that one might expect from an independently advised scrutiny panel funded at public expense. I therefore support the current Minister's amendments for being measured and considered. I don't believe I have heard a strong enough reason for rejecting them.
Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll get this point out of the way at the start, but I'm very proud to lead a party that thinks through its propositions, that identifies the funding associated for them and tests them at the ballot box before bringing them to this Assembly. And I would say to those who would take for granted our support for any other proposition, I think should develop more than what I would regard as a rather superficial understanding of how we operate and the values that underpin what we have brought to this Assembly in whatever positions we've held in this Assembly, be they in government or otherwise. Ma'am, no matter what role I would hold in this Assembly, I would not be inclined to vote in favour of many parts of the unamended proposition for the simple reason that some of them are not well thought through and don't make sense. So let's go through some of those so that I can explain why I'm absolutely comfortable in voting for the amendments to them. Part A, which asks to fund all distance learning courses to the same level as in-person courses, simply doesn't make sense to me, because students may go for distance learning as opposed to relocating to somewhere else to do their learning full-time because of the difference it provides in study-work-life balance, which ought to be taken into account when determining how much funding is given to support those people, so that is as good and viable an option as possible. And to simply replicate what is given to a completely different arrangement to seek your education doesn't make sense. And so for Deputy Ward, the Minister, to seek to accept that where Deputy Gardner is coming from comes from a good place, in that it's absolutely right that we seek to make sure that those who want to do distance learning are not disadvantaged, is that we find a bespoke and tailored solution for them and not copying and pasting it from a completely different way of seeking your education that may not be appropriate. That's why his amendment to that makes perfect sense to me. So, ma'am, Part B, referring to those living for a year with independence to be regarded as completely independent for their funding. Well, speaking perfectly frankly, I think that all students ought to be treated completely independent from their families' incomes in determining what support they get for their education. We do that up until the age of 18. It strikes me as absurd that we do that beyond 18, but be that as it may, with the system that we currently have now, to simply say, without having tested this in any shape or form, that we'll now set a new limit that could be open to all sorts of loopholes, all sorts of ways of getting around it, without exploring and testing them, doesn't make sense. And so Deputy Ward says that they will look at this and they will take into account other criteria to make sure that we can better deliver enhanced targeted support for those for whom the degree of independence they may have from the financial affairs of their family can be taken into account. That is progress, and that enables the Minister to think it through rather than come up with an arbitrary solution that may have unintended consequences. So I think, ma'am, I think much has been said about the clinical components and the listed ones here for extra support to be provided, and I think Deputy Ward very well explained the fact that we already provide substantially more direct financial support for people doing these courses because we don't have the UK system of funding, which is largely based on debt in an absurd system where people are given debt that they'll never be able to pay back, and debt collectors will chase them regardless of that, putting them through all sorts of anxiety, all to fund a service that frankly ought to be coming from tax funding anyway. Thanks very much to the Tory Lib Dem coalition for making that one worse and putting young people in the UK in that ridiculous situation. Our situation in Jersey is much better, and yes, it can be enhanced, and those discussions between the Education Minister and the Health Minister to work out where support can be best targeted for those areas where we may have shortages in health qualifications is absolutely right, but to pluck it from thin air and apply it in this way does not make sense to me. But most importantly, ma'am, of the parts of this that are in contention for the purposes of this amendment is Part E, where the Deputy asks for this to all be implemented by September of this year without identifying the funding source. We have not that long ago been through a government plan process which has helped us define much of this already. Ma'am, I would not be bringing anything to this Assembly without pointing out where funding could come from for it. Some of us in this Assembly are very open about our tax policies that would give us the flexibility we need to do that, but for a part like this to not be able to tell us exactly how much it's going to cost and that we've just got to find that money from somewhere, irrespective of what service cuts it could lead to elsewhere, is not responsible. And that is why I think Deputy Ward's amendment to provide more time to enable us to do that, and we can have those debates on funding as and when they're necessary with something that's much clearer and more tangible, is clearly the most appropriate way forward, ma'am. I don't think it's worth at this point addressing the other parts of the amendment as they've been accepted, but I would point out the inconsistency in accepting half of them and then applying a set of criticisms to the other half of them, which could equally be applicable to the half that you've already agreed. That strikes me as very inconsistent, and I hope that members of the Assembly will back the Education Minister on this so that a proper job can be done, rather than this, which I don't think has been thought through properly and has made no effort to identify the appropriate funding source. We can do better than that.
Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, ma'am. In short, when Deputy Gardner was the Minister in charge of this area, she worked on these proposals with officers. They were thought through, they were assessed and evidenced. Funding was found from within our budget, and they would have been implemented under her leadership. I would ask the Assembly to support the Deputy's proposition today with the parts of the amendment that she's accepted quite graciously, I think, in terms of showing that she's willing to compromise, because what the Assembly wanted with the change of government was not actually a slowing down of any progress that was happening. It was a continuation of these good initiatives that were being considered to help our students. So I would ask members not to slow anything like this down, to support Deputy Gardner today so that the progress can be continued on the work that she started in this area.
Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, I close the debate and I call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, ma'am. I was going to start... yeah, very good. Deputy Reynolds returns to the room. I thank him for his reasoned approach to me and his kindness. One has to, in a leadership role, rise above the personal and move on to the factual. Let me give you a few facts. Deputy Reynolds commented on the independent students. The £2.2 million estimate doesn't presume a system abuse. It is the highest projection of eligible independent students based upon the 2021 census data on full-time employed individual aged 24 and under. Under the current scheme, most of these students would be considered dependent unless they had lived independently for 3 years. Under the amendment that was suggested, the proposition, these students would have been deemed independent students. Thus, the maximum cost is £2.2 million for those students. That's a factual number. So those are the numbers that have not been budgeted for, not been attempted to budget for in the government plan last year, but I've suddenly got to find 2.2 million possibly to find that's just that piece. And I'd ask members to be very accurate in their accusations before they start. In terms of action, well, I'll give you an action. Signed a ministerial order today to increase the maintenance grant. We don't need to discuss it, we can just do it, and that's what's been done today. Let's talk about a few other things. The clinical component. Article 14 relates solely to the tuition fees. Sometimes was put in law, medical courses were typically more expensive than non-medical courses, therefore students had home-free status and therefore fees in general were capped. It's distinct from other costs. Article 15 seeks support, such as living costs, acknowledgement, longer courses and additional expenses, e.g. equipment and clothing. And veterinarian courses were 46 weeks long. That's why they were given more money to do them. Yes, we have a disjointed system, but we're not going to make a disjointed system better by putting in more joins and disjoints. What we have to do is have a joined up, thoughtful approach to what we're going to do, so we have a system that works for everybody longer term and is fundable. Unless, I'm very tempted to say, Mum, until we get a reform government and get a proper taxation system, but I'll move forward from that, it was just the little bit of politics that Deputy Mezek threw in. And I must comment on the difference in this for Deputy Renouf. When I brought propositions, I had to find a place to fund them, and I did that. And I brought them with the money that was going to work for them. This has not got that. And they weren't brought on one or two individuals who had contacted me. They were brought on a genuine, wider need in our society. And I would encourage members to do that. And if that happens, I'd support them. That's not what this is. This is something that was left over and not completed. And let's move on to some of the things from Deputy Gardner in terms of the distance courses. Yes, there was reports into distance courses. The officers did do the work. Let me read you from the reports that I've seen. Distance learning. There is no reliable means of identifying the number of students self-funding distance learning who have bypassed student finances. Estimated impacts are at best endeavour based on average number of inquiries. There is no information on how this is going to work. So I, as a new minister, and I am on my remit, I really am. I work really, really hard, and I know my remit, and I guarantee you that I will continue to know my remit, are being asked to make a decision with no data whatsoever. I'm not going to do that because we don't know the implications of it, and we don't know the implications for Jersey, and that is exactly the point we need to make. Plus, on the distance learning course that the Deputy talked about, there was discretion made. It was not called discretion, it's called something else, special payment, whatever. But that young person accessed the distance course. There are ways around this for this year, and the numbers are very, very small. So to make wide-scale changes with no information on who it's going to affect in the name of one individual, I think is not the way to run the department. And we need to move forward and have a more considered approach. That's what this means. It's about running education in an effective way and not just making piecemeal changes. And I'll just mention a couple of things here. In September 2022, the HE budget was predicted to underspend by hundreds of thousands of pounds, and the minister before the last minister made additional payments and made some changes. And the previous minister in 2023 assessed changes and made the changes that were mentioned. And the reason that a sliding scale wasn't introduced is because there was a predicted overspend if that was introduced. It was not affordable in the funding that we have. So the reality of this is there isn't the funding there. We know there isn't the funding there, but I, over the course of 5 days, will find that funding and implement the things that weren't implemented before. And let's talk about where we discussed this amendment. This amendment was lodged, quite literally, 5 minutes after I was formally introduced into this appointment. Formally. I've been in the post before that. I wasn't mentioned to me before that. I had 5 days in order to get officers together and talk about it. On the Friday of the week of the meeting, we met for the first time to talk about all the different angles. I had the weekend to go and discuss it because I did have to look into it in detail. And I had the courtesy to send the amendment before I sent it to States members, to the Deputy, and then meet with the Deputy in very short order. And indeed, my amendment and the reports was published on time, within the time that was allocated. So I think we've done everything we could possibly do. And I think those supposed issues about not consulting are simply untrue. And they're simply factually incorrect. I've done everything I possibly could to turn this around with what I believe is a very intelligent, considered, and a meaningful approach to making change in the longer term that might actually be successful and sustainable in the long term. And I tell you something about the politics that I believe in, it's principled and sustainable in the long term. We don't suddenly change our mind on principles overnight because they suit us a bit better and then change our mind back again. And if I was to do that and be called out on that, that's fine. I'll have to take that on the chin and I won't be upset over it. So in terms of I believe in loans, I do believe in loans because they exist, Ma'am, sorry. I also believe in life after love, but that's a very different issue. Apologies, Ma'am, my boys went to get a Sher quote in it. That was indeed shoehorned in, I apologise for that one. Sorry, it's all getting a bit serious and a bit unpleasant, and I don't want it to be that way. I want my time in this role to be positive and constructive. So in 2023 in scrutiny, this was the comment that was made in scrutiny. I'll quote from Hansard. A commitment was given to announce the next suite of changes for higher education funding that would take effect in September 24 to be announced in January 2024. However, the Minister also noted that major changes may take longer and highlighted that consultation with stakeholders would be necessary for any changes that would require a change in law. I totally agree, and that's exactly what we need to do with these. And that's exactly what I'm intending to do in short order. Now, I understand the deadline, the 31st of March, and I can accept fully this being lodged straight away. I have no issue with that. The backbenchers need to lodge whatever they want. But I think we also need to be realistic about what we can achieve in that time. And I go back to, I think I'm going to just about finish there because others have spoken and we've had enough of these, of the discussion around these amendments. I urge members to accept these amendments for some simple reasons. One, they give time to make the right type of change, but give the opportunity to use the discretion that does exist. And recently that discretion was used again for a case for higher education funding where the parents' income was disregarded. And so therefore that student could be independent. And I'm quite willing to make those changes when they come up. They're not frequent. But the changes that are suggested in the original proposition that need to be amended will have significant effects on the fund that we have in order to pay long term. And they won't necessarily have the impact that we want them to have. Distance learning for, I'm not going to go into that, but you can look up yourself the Open University stuff on the on distance learning and part-time courses and the way they classify people as part-time students and the design of Open University courses to enable people to access those courses. And any comparison with the UK is unfair because of the loans. So let's sum up where we are. We are providing the best we can at the moment with a grant system for our young people. Many of them have all of their fees paid. And you can earn up to £140,000 and still get £5,250 of your fees paid. So that extra £40,000 costs a family £4,000 a year. Yes, I agree with Deputy Mezza. It would be great for everyone to be independent at 18. But the cost of that would probably be about £30 million a year, and we would need to change our tax system. So I ask members, do you want to change your tax system? If the Deputy brings that change, I will absolutely support it. But what we have at the moment is a system that is funded, and I don't want to lose this system. I want it to work the best we possibly can, to target it the best we possibly can and get the best we possibly can for young people in Jersey long-term and sustainably, and young people in Jersey now for the jobs that we need in Jersey, to keep them here, to stop them getting in debt for their education and to value what we have. And I'm quite happy to look at other schemes that will help young people before they go to gain income so they've got money to go away with, and to talk to the tax office about the Minister for Treasury Minister, I'll get it right in a moment, about what happens in terms of tax relief and so on for university fees. We may need to look at that again. But this change now, happening so quickly, is going to have an impact which I'm afraid I just simply cannot justify. So I urge members, please accept the amendments. Let's move on with this. We can make the changes in the long term if they're the right changes. I can work with the Health Minister. We can work with a lifelong learning remit. We can target our distance learning. We can use the best resources we've got at Highlands College, Institute of Law, JCAS, all of those institutions on Ireland that are offering things before we go elsewhere, rather than pouring money into large universities because we say you want to do a distance learning course there. And let's give our young people the opportunity that's best for the island, best for the people, and affordable at the moment in the time that we've got left. Ma'am, I moved the amendment and I urge members to vote for it. Thank you.
Are you content to take the paragraphs 1 to 6 en bloc, Minister?
Yes, please.
And you're wanting the appel?
Sorry?
You're wanting an appel?
Yes, please. Sorry, Ma'am. I'm a bit not calm.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. The voting is on paragraphs 1 to 6 of the amendment, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had an opportunity to cast their votes, including those online. And I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the amendment has been carried. There were 33 votes pour and 9 votes contre. Greffier.
Those members voting contre, the Connétable St Lawrence and Deputies Gardner, War, Renouf, Jearn, Wilson, Stevenson, Andrews and Doublé.
We now return to the main proposition as amended. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? If no members wish to speak, then close the debate and I call upon Deputy Gardner to reply.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you for everyone who contributed to the debate. Actually, the debate was around the amendment. I will give a couple of remarks before I call to the appel. Thank you for the Minister bringing transcript from the scrutiny hearing. Actually, this transcript explains questions about so-called inconsistency the Deputy Mazik mentioned. I accepted the part that I promised to the scrutiny to deliver at 2025, and I haven't accepted the part that I promised to the scrutiny to deliver in 2024. Deputy Morse thanked that I need to know better completely. It has been through the scrutiny process for 2 years. It's not something that I've created before this. And it was interesting how the debate about this turned into the tax debate. Because what was completely disregarded or maybe dismissed, or maybe I wasn't convincing enough, an apology for the young people who didn't get the change for 2024. It has been funded because we're spending just about 15 million and we have 16 million in envelope. But it was disregarded, or unless some of this money was spent elsewhere. It's interesting, there feels about 5 minutes. Actually, the minister was in the post for months.
and it was 2 weeks to bring the amendment, but I understand and I completely recognize and I understand, and I'm, by the way, grateful for Deputy Ward bringing an amendment because he could just decline. So at least now we have a pass going forward that amended by the Assembly, hopefully will be accepted by the Assembly, and we can follow this up. I really don't bring me this pleasure, but I can't help myself, really. I'm really surprised by the Reform Party votes, especially on Part A. And it's not that I'm thanking somebody's for granted. I brought this amendment because I believed, and this is what I would do. But why I'm talking about the Part A specifically, and Deputy Mezek said that they're standing behind, because the Part 8 basically was amended from fund all to explore. So we deleted fund all. If we are going to the Reform Jersey pledges, I went to the Reform Jersey manifesto. Reform Jersey pledges to cover the cost of university tuition fees for all Jersey students and introduce student loan scheme to assist with maintenance costs through their studies on top of the existing grants. So Reform Jersey pledge to cover the cost of all Jersey students, and all was deleted from the proposition. I hope the all will come back when the minister will develop the scheme. But again, as the minister mentioned, and by the way, there is something that I completely agree with Deputy Mezek. This is actually important to mention as well. It's not where I disagree, and mention also where I agree. I believe that student finance needs to be judged on young people income, not dependent on parents' income all the time, because the parents can make decision if student going to university or not going to university. And I believe that students should be independent. And if it will come, I would really, really welcome. So, not to take it longer, I will not take it in parts because actually the amendment was adopted as it is, and I really hope that we as an assembly going through this hurdle can continue, at least the roadmap is there, and we as a scrutiny will continue to look at delivery of the government that wants to deliver, and hope we'll see the delivery in 2025, and I call to the appel.
Well, the appel has been called for. Ask members to return to their seats. I think everybody's here. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. Four members have cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition has been carried. There were 42 votes pour and no votes contre. So that concludes public business for this meeting. I invite the Chair of PPC to propose the arrangement of public business for future meetings. St Martin.
Thank you, Ma'am. At the present, there are 9 items listed for the meeting on the 16th of April. And as the order paper includes offshore wind and protection of trees, I believe that we'll be sitting for at least 2 days. And so, but as usual, please keep the remaining days free to attend the states if needed. Ma'am, I propose the arrangement of business.
There's no other comments. And that's the arrangement of business for the next meeting. Very well. The states stand adjourned until Tuesday, the 16th of April.